Good morning to you and welcome to Real Talk on this Wednesday morning. It's May 12th. Ryan Jesperson here with you alongside Sarah Hoyles and Samuel Brooks. Of course, every morning, Real Talk is brought to you by the team at Bitcoin Well, our presenting sponsor. They've been there since day one, and they've been in the crypto game, I can't say since day one, but in this field, in this context, if you've got 7 or 8 years worth of history behind you, you are an OG. You've seen the rises, the dips, the highs, the lows. You've got the experience people need when they got questions about crypto. When we have questions, we go to the team at Bitcoin Well. You can do the same by finding them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
In about 10 minutes' time, we're going to check in with intensive care Dr. Darren Markland. He was scheduled to be with us last week, and you may remember that show. He sent his regrets moments before, which we had paved the way for. We said, Doc, hey, listen, you need to be where you need to be, and sometimes that's on the front line of this battle, this COVID-19 battle that sees intensive care units across Canada, in some cases filling up, in other cases full. I hesitate to use the word overwhelmed. We'll ask the doctor if that word works, but it would imply, I think, that healthcare staff are on their heels or somewhat not up to the task, and that's certainly not the case. But the good doctor last week wrote to us in a quick email, like 1 or 2 sentences, said, hey, listen, I'm literally running around the ICU today, says we're going to have to reschedule it, painted a really clear picture for us about what the reality is in Alberta and Canada's ICUs. So Dr. Darren Markland coming up in about 10 minutes' time. I'm looking forward to checking in with outdoor adventure and travel blogger Philip Turnbull, who's written a piece on Alberta's new Kananaskis Conservation Pass for the first time since the park was opened by former Alberta Premier Peter Lougheed. Visitors will face a park pass cost. That's right, $90 for annual access to the parks, with some areas exempted and some park goers exempted as well. The government says lower income Albertans will not be paying the $90 annual fee, but we'll get Mr. Turnbull's take on whether or not he thinks it's a good move. Some people have stepped forward in support. As a matter of fact, Joe Lougheed out of Calgary, a lawyer with ties to the former premier, as you may presume, has spoken out and said, by way of his Twitter account, hey, look, these fees are going to go towards this, and this might not be the worst thing in the world. Those are my words, not his. And so not everybody is decrying this. Others, though, the critics of the fee, are saying, hey, listen, first of all, how do we know it's actually going to go to conservation or to park operating expenses? And also, isn't the whole point of provincial parks the fact that they belong to all of us, that there is no pay to play, so to speak, that families that maybe have had a rough go, that have dipped into the RSPs or maxed the lines of credit because they haven't worked in 18 months and they know they want to take the kids somewhere special this summer, but they can't afford to do something wild, so they're going to go out and do something truly in the wild, get out into the parks, get out into the backcountry, spend minimal money for maximum return. You see how you can torque these conversations, right? Because parks matter to people. People love their parks. And so when you start introducing fees when you haven't had them before, well, it rubs some people the wrong way. We're curious for your take on this. Of course, Sarah will be keeping an eye on the live chat on our hashtag, RealTalkRJ, powered by Park Power. And of course, you can always send us an email via talk@ryanjesperson.com. I'm very much looking forward to a conversation with documentary filmmaker Daniel Lombroso, who's the director behind White Noise. It's being presented right now on demand. As a matter of fact, as soon as Real Talk wraps, you can go watch it yourself by visiting northwestfest.ca. It's Canada's longest running nonfiction documentary film festival. It runs through till May 16th, so you have 4 more days. I love this. I mean, I regret the fact that, and so do the festival organizers, that we can't gather in person. We can't be at the theater. The smell of fresh popcorn, I'm not going to rub it into everybody. I'm not going to remind you about everything that we missed, the sensory experience of being in a theater. But typically, White Noise would screen, for example, Tuesday at 7 o'clock. And if you couldn't make it, or if it was sold out, tough luck. Now, because it's on demand online, anybody can watch White Noise. You're going to want to, both Sarah and I did. I watched it last night, watched it a little bit late. I poured myself a prairie whiskey and I settled it on the couch. You sort of prep yourself mentally when you're getting set to watch a documentary on white nationalism. I wasn't sure what headspace I should be in heading in. What did you make of it? To call it powerful might be an understatement, a little bit unnerving. How about for you?
A little bit unnerving.
Yeah.
Are you kidding me? Yeah. I mean, I guess it's... Yeah, it took a lot out of me. I will say that. I had to prepare myself. It was like, am I ready for this? And then, yeah, just hearing the kinds of hateful and hurtful sentiments that some of the folks that are featured on the film. I mean, I also felt like, should I be watching this? Am I? Oh boy.
Why not? Why wouldn't you watch it?
Well, I've like, do I want to give these people space in my brain?
That's an interesting angle. I'm serious. Why I hope the look on your face you don't think that I'm being facetious or that I'm mocking or anything. No, I'm saying that's an interesting.
That's my reflective look.
It's kind of the like I think of Jim Carrey in the films where he's like la 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 la, you know what I mean? Like I'm just not gonna, if I don't read, if I don't do the deep dive on if I were to never learn the names Richard Spencer or Mike Cernovich or Lauren Southern or for that matter Gavin McInnes or any of the others, and we could go on and on and on.
Yeah, it's a long list.
But I'd hate to make anybody famous here in Canada. But if I don't learn, I mean, because you can get into real rabbit holes. As I was watching the film, all of a sudden I'm going, well, Cernovich, I've heard the name, but I don't know too much. There's certain guys where you're aware of, they're on your radar. For me, it would be like Ben Shapiro would be an example of a guy that he's on my radar, and what he's doing in media is quite remarkable. A lot of the messaging is somewhat cringeworthy for me, from my perspective. If I don't take a strong stance here, some people are going to accuse me of the both sides thing. I'm just saying I haven't done deep dives into or read enough about Ben Shapiro, Mike Cernovich to say that I truly understand what they're all about. But generally speaking, it's not that difficult to discern what they represent or the pillars upon which their platforms are built, right? And so you find yourself watching a doc like White Noise, and then all of a sudden there I am on their Twitter accounts learning more about them and digging into it and reading more about the history. You're right. I mean, it does open the door. Then there's the whole counterpoint of sunlight is the best disinfectant. That it's important that everybody knows about this stuff. It's important that we talk about it, that we have feature interviews like this with Daniel Lombroso coming up in an hour or whatever. So, yeah, unnerving. Interesting. I'm curious to know, for people that haven't seen White Noise yet, which I would imagine would be the majority of you, although I suspect that by the end of our conversation with the filmmaker, that might change in the next 48 hours as people check it out. The access is remarkable. It's not a film where he's grabbed a bunch of video off YouTube of them speaking and then narrated it over stock photos. He's in the cars with them. He's behind the scenes with them. He somehow
with them,
backstage, he secured long-term access, and we'll get him to explain the whole filmmaking process. I'm curious to know how he secured the access, how he presented the project, and of course, what correspondence has been like with these personalities since the film came out, right? Some pretty big implications there. It's going to be a big day here on the show, to say the very least. We're going to get into some of your emails as well. Plus, we're excited to launch a new weekly feature in partnership with our friends at Tourism Jasper called MyJasper Memory. Very excited about that. This is the first Wednesday of many to come where we're all going to take a trip out to the mountains, so to speak, for a couple of moments. We love that we're doing it on Hump Day. We love that we're doing it in the middle of the week. It's going to turn into, Sarah, Wednesday as the new Thursday. Of course, Thursday's been the new Friday for a while. So virtually, our weekends will begin every Wednesday morning, thanks to the team at Tourism Jasper. Sam, you cool with it? You got the sleeves rolled up today. I feel like you could start to ease yourself mentally into the weekend.
Ease myself mentally in the weekend. You just got me dreaming about Jasper. I might ease myself mentally into a tent on the side of a mountain.
Attaboy.
You got me thinking about that now.
And the thing about what you just said, a tent on the side of the mountain, and you're speaking my language. But when we say Jasper, somebody else might be picturing, you had me, mentally out paddling on Moline Lake, or you had me mentally doing the Moline Ice Walk, or mentally in the lobby at the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge sipping on an old fashioned. Everybody's going to have a different story there, so that's coming up in just a little bit. We mentioned Real Talk RJ. That's the hashtag where you can find us. It's the hashtag I include every weekday morning around 8 o'clock-ish when I send out our guest list of who's going to be on the show. And if you're on Instagram instead, I put that on my Insta story if you want to follow me there. Our hashtag powered by the team at Park Power right now. If you're a friend of this show, that if you use the promo code 2021-Real Talk at parkpower.ca with no strings attached, they're going to give you 70% off $70 off. That could have been bad. $70, which is still a great deal.
It is a great deal.
70% is a way better deal, but I don't know if the team at Park Power would appreciate that. $70 is still pretty good.
That's better than a kick in the teeth.
$70 is dinner. Dinner's on them. $70 off your first bill.
Nice dinner.
A nice dinner on them. Like that's the dinner where you go, why, yes, I would like to add the sauteed onions, the mushrooms, the extra pork belly, the whatever you have. That tees up conversation about tomorrow's show on Thursday around, doesn't it? Talking about pork belly in front of vegetarians. What am I doing here? Hey, add-ons, baby. Back to internet, electricity, and natural gas. That's the game that Park Power's in. And they love to compete for your business. You can take it anywhere you want in the province of Alberta. You have that choice. Why not support a group? Why not support a company that supports its own community through profit sharing and this show as well at parkpower.ca. Well, we've been keeping a keen eye on this month's this month's issue of Edify magazine, where they celebrate and recognize innovators. One of them is prominent intensive care doc Darren Markland, the physician featured here, and by the way, which is an absolutely incredible photo shoot. I know that he's going to deflect all recognition of that and all praise. We're very grateful that the good doctor has been able to make time for us. Welcome back to the show. You were one of the first guests we ever had on here back in November, and I'm proud of what you've been doing. I'm happy to see it celebrated in this month's edition of Edify. What does it mean to you to be recognized as an innovator, doctor?
Oh, that's such a loaded question. As I said, I'm not an innovator. We really just demonstrated commitment to the people. We were tested, but I think doctors are very uncomfortable with this degree of exposure because we work in a system, and the reason why we did as well as we did has nothing to do with me, but everything to do with the system and the people who ran it under some pretty adverse circumstances. Our nurses, our respiratory therapists, everyone just comes together all the time. And that's especially salient as during our third wave, when we all kind of said, it's going to happen again. We got to do this one more time. But we did. And so, it's difficult when you focus on one person, when really what makes this work is just the whole group.
You're recognized as an innovator in the context of how you have managed. It's kind of funny. I find myself, just to take you into my brain for a second, I feel like I'm being really careful about the words I pick and the words I choose, even in teeing up this conversation, Doc. I caught myself as I was about to say, as ICUs across Canada are overwhelmed, because I felt like that word implies that either the incredible staff in there are incapable, or that there's an insufficiency of resources, where I know that really everybody's just pedal to the metal. Is the word overwhelmed an inaccurate one in describing ICUs right now? We hear that they're at capacity. As lay people, that catches our attention.
I think overwhelmed is more of an emotional phrase. I think one of the analogies I gave was, driving down a mountain road with spongy brakes that you're not familiar with. You're mashing the corners and you're tail sliding, but you're doing good. It's just you don't know what the next corner has. And I think people who follow me know that my tweets sometimes reflect my inner stress. And I try to be optimistic, but it's also I try to be very honest about what's going on. And so where we were overwhelmed is just not knowing what was coming up. We had plans. We knew we could function really well together. It's just when you're not sure if your brakes are working, you are really worried about what's coming up around the bend.
You have, I mean, your social media has been, and I could pick any number of examples, but you really have put it out there, and people really have connected. I know you probably won't appreciate this characterization, but you're a Twitter celebrity, and when it comes to what, I know you don't like it, but it's true. I mean, 25,000 people follow you across Canada because of the insights you provide, and they're not all just number crunching. They're not all just, hey, everybody, wash your hands, wear a mask. You talk about your personal exhaustion. You talk about your self-care. Your cycling, the way that you get to work through Edmonton's famed river valley. You share stories of people exasperated. I mean, your story the other day, can I ask you to share about the fella was he being intubated? You'll have to remind me. And he's on the phone with his employer, and you had to take over the phone call. I mean, we don't get insights like this all the time.
We see that what this pandemic does has amplified, the cracks that were always there. I mean, everyone talks about how, lockdowns cause mental stress. But if you don't have the ability to lock down, that's where the stress comes. This is why we're seeing so much substance abuse and so much trauma, is that there are people who just don't have the privilege to be able to work from home or be able to take some time off. And I think I've seen this. I work in an inner city hospital where we see disparities all the time, but you can be in this environment and become numb to it. And I think that is what this has done to me. This has been my awakening, and it's happened in real time on social media, which has good aspects and bad ones. This gentleman is just an example of so many people that we see are just living on the edge right now. And I think that is a culmination of everybody's frustration. And for someone in this circumstance to be thinking how important it was to tell his boss that he wasn't going to be in was huge. Like, that just suddenly hit me. I think everybody has had a cold or been unwell and like, oh, I better call my boss. This guy was incredibly unwell, and he just had no idea. He was so focused on the lifeline. That was his job. It meant everything. And I mean, that was a wake-up call. That just showed me the social disparities that we deal with in ICU, and how by the time it comes to us, the road is set, the path is there, and that maybe this hard work these resources should be focused in other places. And I mean, that's where it starts to turn into the whole politicization of healthcare. But when I'm seeing people die of social deaths, as a physician, how can I not acknowledge that what's driving a lot of our critical care problems are disparities and prejudices?
Can I don't have can I just ask you to expand on that? I mean, disparities and prejudices. We've actually had some really interesting commentary, including in the last couple of weeks on the show about what you might describe as systemic racism in healthcare. We've heard from a professor of nursing at the University of Alberta as an example. We got some insight there. What I think is important. Let me just establish this for audience members who may be hearing from you for the first time here on this show, who may be from other parts of Canada or outside Canada. You're a physician. You're an ICU doctor at the Royal Alexandra Hospital in central Edmonton, correct? Which is for people that don't know, it's probably the busiest ER in central and northern Alberta. Correct me if I'm wrong. And it sees pretty interesting traffic in there. I shouldn't call it traffic. Pretty interesting demographic in there because you have people in the inner city. But I would imagine that you've probably seen maybe, what do I want to call it? More diversity in the demographic with regards to the ICU now in COVID. I mean, has your perspective changed on some of the social disparities, and have you had maybe even an epiphany?
I've had a slow awakening, and it's funny, right? These things are like exponential curves. I remember training and having some very controversial views because we grow up in the environment that we're taught. But I've seen evolution of and realization amongst medicine. I completely acknowledge that racism exists in medicine. I completely acknowledge that there are prejudices. I've said that for a while, but now it's really hitting home because you can separate yourself from the extreme cases. And at the ALEC, we see people in extremis. We see homelessness a lot. We see people who are dying from complications of drug use. But when it starts to get closer to home, when you see people who look like your neighbors and your acquaintances coming in because they can't separate themselves, they have to go to work, they get sick because their kids are sick and they end up on a ventilator. All of a sudden, the connections happen and you realize that this is a spectrum disorder, that if we allow these thoughts to propagate in, what we consider our altruistic places, they poison the connections, and we have to fix those things. And that's working on the social glue that keeps us all together. That's what bugs me about COVID, right? I'm just a doc with a big Twitter account. What I should really be doing is fixing the bigger problems, but I really like working with people. Public health, public policy, addiction control. Some of our physicians who are in this are taking the brunt, and they just don't have the luxury to sit back and take the compliments from their patients or from the people who are on their social media feed. This is what we need to fix.
Had an amazing conversation with OBGYN Dr. Fiona Matatal the other day about social media and about advocacy and how so many physicians and healthcare professionals have found themselves in a somewhat unusual, and even I can't stand using the word. Everybody has to use it in the course of the pandemic, but an unprecedented. I had to say it in an unprecedented position of really having to fight for basic respects, to counter some narratives, to work on educating and informing the public. And I'm not just talking about even on the politics of it. I'm talking around things like, hesitance around vaccines or, even people denying the very existence of COVID. It's been a fascinating year to see physicians and other healthcare professionals step up in that role, and people in other fields for that matter. A shout out to educators in particular. Natalie, I wanted to tee up this next question. Natalie Jolie out of St. Albert says, in referencing our conversation with Jason Kenney, who made his debut on the show just the other day, out of Richmond, Virginia, of course, not Alberta's premier, but Jason Kenney out of Richmond, Virginia. Fantastic conversation. He calls himself a pre-Trump Republican. And Natalie watched, and she says to me on Twitter, this might be the most thoughtful interview about politics I've heard in years. I love the idea we should be listening to and learning from everyone, no matter their political affiliations. I love that from Natalie, but here's the response that really got me. From Tom Wilson, who notes that he's not the hockey player. He doesn't want everybody ganging up on him. He says, Jesperson keeps finding people whose political priorities I do not share, but who are compassionate, thoughtful human beings that recultivate my faith in humanity. That to me is some of the best praise and best feedback that a talk show could ever achieve. But what it indicates to me is that these audience members are here as an engaged, dynamic audience. An audience that is open-minded, that approaches this almost as a gathering of community every single day. So when you say, this is my preamble, but I wanted to tee it up. When you tell us that this pandemic has reiterated to you that our healthcare system is racist and that there are social disparities that exist and that are perpetuated, people are going to want to know, what are we going to do about it? It's going to bother people that the healthcare system that they participate in is being described as racist by a pretty high-profile doctor that knows the inside. So where do we start?
I think we acknowledge it, right? That's been my first step, is to realize that some of my language and some of my approach and just my inherent reactions to common clinical presentations are based on things that were 10, 15 years ago, which weren't right back then. We need to do some fundamental stuff about the way that we believe how we connect with Indigenous people. We have to do real reconciliation. We have to separate judgment of mental health from physical health. I mean, mental health is such an important part of the onus. And we really have to decriminalize our thinking about addictions, because it's just a way of separating us from them. You know, the difference between me and somebody who rolls through the emerge is I just spend more on a bottle of wine, right? I think those are the bridges that we need to build. And I've seen a lot of it happen on the municipal level. You know, I've had people on Twitter who have, you know, educated me gently without setting me back, both from our history and also from our perspectives, both gender and sexuality and race and privilege. Privilege is this huge word that you say it and people will shut down really quick. But, you know, when you have enough people behind you just giving you gentle glacial nudges, I think we start to move in the right direction. And you're right. When you talk about bringing in empathy, what you're talking about is depolarizing the arguments. And social media is great in one respect because you get to go up to the cliff and shout. But where it really leads to problems is when, you know, you have a limited venue to talk about nuanced issues, and bringing, you know, people into the middle is what we used to do before social media. We got together, you look somebody in the eye, and you're not going to lead with your fists. You're going to have a nuanced discussion. That's what this does.
And even just, you know, the isolation, like the actual literal physical isolation. I don't know if I say the word with a straight face. I acknowledge some people have really isolated. Others, you know, end the lockdown, they say, as they march through shopping malls. And I digress. But we are more withdrawn, more removed from regular social interaction than we might normally be. There's not the rubbing shoulders at the opera or the hockey game. There's not the big fundraising galas in the convention centers, and you don't find yourself face to face with as many people. And I find even with myself, subconsciously, I think it impacts how you conduct yourself and how you interact. I mean, if somebody were to have a position or to make a statement with which you might not align in person, you would handle it much differently than if you know you're never going to see this person's face and you're interacting online. I mean, it's weird what can happen. I'm as guilty as anybody else.
Yeah. Okay. It's been going on forever. I mean, when I take a consult over the phone versus when I see someone in real life, you're going to be very different. We have to figure out, first of all, yeah, we are inherently social people. And social media is a filter that allows the best and the worst of us to come out. I never realized how, again, this word privilege that I get to go to work every single day. And that means my social structures have been preserved. So in a way, I'm not getting how lonely and how separated people are out there. So for me to stand up and say, you need to separate, you need to mask, I'm not, in a way, like I'm not feeling it the way everybody else is. I get why people need to be connected. I know why people need to be connected. One of the things that I think this pandemic has done is it has kind of stepped back all the things that I had worked on outside of medicine, getting people together, community-based, looking at social connection. That's hard. And I really believe this is why vaccines are so important, is that this is the only way that we're going to get back to some normalcy. Because social media is, it just pushes all the dopamine sensors. And we want to feel dopamine, but there's no repercussions. There's nothing to pull us back from the brink when we keep mashing that like button.
I had emails leading up to this. As a matter of fact, we were getting emails about this interview last week. And I've just written down the names. I don't have all the emails in front of me, but like Lindy and Daniel and Karen and Brenda and others all had questions. Generally speaking, if I can lump them all together on you providing a perspective check on how we're doing right now, on what the ICUs look like. I think a pretty important perspective check comes in the form of this article in Edify. People can read it at edifyedmonton.com. That's Hobbs, is that right?
That's my dog.
By the way, good looking boy, good boy, Hobbs. And anyway, the ICU here has doubled its bed count. I'm telling our audience, not you, doctor, from 25 to 50. Floor space is ballooned from its 10,000 square feet pre-pandemic. You've taken over post-operative recovery rooms. Elective surgeries have been canceled as a result. An ICU that would normally see patients from northern BC, the Northwest Territories, and elsewhere. You and your colleagues have been pulling 100-hour work weeks for months. On many days, you've not seen your family. You've been staying at the hospital, sleeping on a couch. Would this be the same thing, minus 25 to 50 patients 3 years ago, or is most of this, has all of this over the past year been new for you?
We've seen spikes. Influenza gets us really busy, but not like this. We initially, the second wave was a pretty dark place because we were seeing much older patients. This was before our vulnerable population was vaccinated. And so what really drove a lot of the stress was the ethical dilemmas about what's going to happen when people of older ages come into our ICU. Will they benefit from care? Will we have to make some very hard decisions about, do we proceed down the standard pathways? We didn't know back then. Now that we've seen people vaccinated, our ICU is a very different place. I have cautious and guarded optimism about our third wave because vaccines have been working. As we now only see our younger people coming into hospital. Yes, the numbers are high, but the complications are lower. We're turning people over faster. There's less ethical dilemma because when somebody's 40, you got to go hard because they will see benefit to it and they have many years ahead to get better. So we compound with a good vaccine supply with people who are motivated to take the best vaccine available. And it's working out. We're busy now. We are full. We've taken over more spaces in the hospital. But our general sense is that, we can see light at the end of the tunnel here. And we just got to get everybody, we got to get those shots in the arms. And my biggest hope is that we can get around the vaccine hesitancy because that's now the obstacle. The hospital works, the system works, management knows what they do. We can procure supplies. But what really is going to make sure that there isn't a fourth wave and that this doesn't become a thing that keeps happening is that we get these shots in people's arms, that we get 80% of people vaccinated. Because this stuff works. It is working on every single variant, right? There were all these concerns out of the lab, but the real life truth is that all of these vaccines prevent all of these variants and keep you out of the ICU. So that's what's going to get us back to being who we were before, hopefully better than we were before.
We were talking yesterday about Justice Minister Casey Matthew's comments about how the provincial NDP, the federal Liberals, and the media wanted to see hospitals overwhelmed and wanted to see, real problems when it came to COVID-19. At first, his staff insisted he would not apologize. Then the Premier claimed he had not seen the comments, which is obviously untrue. And then, what do you know, the Justice Minister issuing an apology late last night. We talked about it on the show briefly yesterday. And I got a bit of feedback from audience members that said, Ryan, one of the things you didn't even touch on is at the beginning of the Justice Minister's comments on Facebook to a constituent, he essentially said, basically, we're almost out of the woods on this. And one listener said, Ryan, you just breezed past that like that wasn't worth discussion. Are we? I mean, is that politicking? The government would love nothing more, and I don't blame them. I don't blame everybody for wishing. I'm among them. Wishing that we were almost out of the woods on this. Do you see evidence of it? I mean, I know you're going to say it might be predicated on 70% or more of the population becoming vaccinated, but do you see signs that give you reason to be optimistic?
Look, the woods are different than they were 15 years ago or 15 months ago. So we're coming out of the woods, but we could easily go back into them if we don't learn from our mistakes. The challenge about this pandemic is it seeds much deeper issues in the world. And we have no time in this interview to go through all the potential things that we have to fix in this world. But our numbers in the ICU are going up. If you look at the stats and if you look at how, yes, they are going up. But I think what that is just a surge from before we put in these restrictions. These restrictions are meaningful. They will work. And like I say, I don't think we're going to see, triage, which got everybody's gosh in a wad. It was a discussion that I think had to be put out there, but I think we got this. But going back to the second wave, why we're in the third wave is we got cocky. And that's the other tough discussion, right? Is how do we change the way that we live for the next time that we see a virus come out of the blue, come out of the woods? And how do we prevent ourselves from going back into that dark place when it does happen? And I'm not going to say if. We know the coronavirus was burbling for a long time. We know that with 8 billion people on the planet, we're effectively the meat, right? We have to be prepared for the future.
What? Hang on a second, though. I was getting set to wrap, but no way. Unless you have to go. If you have to go, we asked you to stay with us. I'm already into overtime. If you have to go, we can go. But what do you mean? Because I mean, I would compare this to like floods or wildfires, and we tell ourselves that when half of a Canadian province is underwater, we say it's the 100-year flood, or when an entire city, home to 100,000 people, nearly burns to the ground, we say that was a once in a generation or a once in a century wildfire. Except for the folks in Slave Lake would say, yeah, except for that there was one not too many years before that. Is it? I've been leading myself to believe, and maybe I've been reading the wrong columns, that there was the Spanish flu in 1918, and then there was COVID-19 101 years later, and our great grandkids might have to deal with something down the line. What's changed that's leading you to believe that this could become more of a frequent event?
Again, that's a bigger discussion that's going to light some fires of its own.
Let's do it.
We're talking about the planet here. We're talking about biodiversity, right? The reason why this virus came out of the wild was because we pushed into the wild. Coronaviruses don't discriminate between humans or bats. They want to go where the action is. They want to eat the food. We're the food, right? We have effectively taken over most of the biomass of the planet. Other species are getting pushed into, oblivion. Not the word I wanted, but we're the predominant force. And we've known this. What's taken us off the bigger issues, this coronavirus pandemic, has really taken us away from the reason we've gotten here. We have environmental issues, and those reflect very strongly in the social justice, in societal pressures. And so that's why we're seeing it, right? When you interact with nature, nature pushes back. And so, yeah, coronavirus is one of them. With the specifics around it, yeah, it's not a virus that's going to mutate a lot. But when you put pressure on a system, it pushes back, and we will see this. That means meaningful changes with respect to environmental policy, with respect to education, with respect to birth control, third world countries, giving people power so that they don't need to reproduce so much, saving it up for the next generation, watching up CO2, checking different fuels. I mean, this big topic. My brain starts, I already have a big head, but it makes my head bigger, right? When I start thinking about these things. And it's part of the way that I kind of live my life the way I do. I have, solar panels on my house. I ride my bike. I try to encourage active transport. I want people to be healthy, but living in smaller footprints. I try to live that. I think that's important, just to be happy with smaller things.
It's been so, it's been so amazing. I want you to know, as you know, but let me just say for the audience that may not be aware, I say this as a son of a physician. Okay. So this is an internal perspective, but I think that a lot of people, you alluded to earlier, you said the difference between me, I hope I'm quoting you accurately, the difference between you and some of the people you see in the ER or in the ICU might be that you spend more on a bottle of wine. And that there's been some sort of a public sentiment, and it's been fueled by politicians, I think, pouring gasoline on the fire, talking about, for example, physicians' compensation. Don't worry, I'm not going to take you into this. But, okay. They'll talk about, they don't recognize, for example, that a physician's running a small business and paying for a lease and paying a nurse and paying all these other, they'll say this doctor billed Alberta Health Services for $475,000 last year, $500,000. Doctors need to take pay cuts, and these one percenters and this, everybody talks about these entitled doctors and physicians, and we spend billions of dollars on doctors. And it's been really interesting for me to see over the course of the last year or so, some of the public narrative, and not in a good way, shift on physicians who are now a bunch of lefties, right? Who are now, people are calling them lefties and socialists and physicians. And it's been really interesting to see a swing. Some of the people who, here you are, an ICU doctor, and some people might say, if I can, and I'm taking liberties here, I wonder what car he drives. I wonder what his house looks like. I wonder where he goes on vacation, right? You know it, Doc. Where at the same time, when you start talking about, systemic racism, social justice, access to care, I mean, these types of things you don't expect to hear, or you wouldn't typically expect to hear in that conversation. I wonder if members of the public, some of them that have been the loudest critics, have had a difficult time wrapping their minds around where physicians have been going with advocacy in the past year. What do you make of that?
I think that's always been a part of who we are. It's one of the tenements of our professional association is advocacy. It's just, now we're yelling it from the mountaintops because it's clear how important it is. And, I was really apolitical going through school. I didn't mean to become socialist. I guess when you do medicine, it just translates that way. When you see people who get sick, they get sick because they don't have guaranteed income or they lose their jobs. I mean, yes, we speak really highly of our medical system because we don't pay for it, but it's not like we've taken the next step, right? We could solve homelessness very quickly like Finland has. But you throw that into the mix and your taxes go up. And so our Alberta advantage is low taxes, but a lot of the people who take the Alberta advantages don't retire here. They don't have skin in the game in the end. I want us to build up our society so that you want to stay in Alberta when you're done and you want to hang out with, people. And we've dealt with our mental health disorders by giving people houses and a chance to do the right thing. All of these people who have built themselves up from the ground really neglect the fact that they got a really good socialized education. Their parents were supported because they had healthcare and vaccinations, and that our public infrastructure has got them to where they need to be. And then all of a sudden they forget that and say that they're self-made. No, we need a little more of that so everyone can be a little more self-made. Yeah.
You wonder how many people being loaded up into the back of an ambulance, absolutely terrified because they can't breathe, as they're triaged and rushed into a bed that's available most times, onto a ventilator in drastic circumstances, receiving the best of care. If any of them would opt out of socialism at any of those points, I don't see anybody decrying socialism. It's funny. It's a word that's been absolutely weaponized, right? And,
you're right.
I mean, the word social, and you know what this is going to turn into. Someone's gonna pull like 14 seconds of this interview and put it out and say Jesperson trumpeting socialism from his podcast platform. But the reality is the word itself, the root is social. And when you look at our values and upon the bedrock upon which we build our society, a lot of it is a tinge or flavor or inspired by or unabashedly socialism. And I wish that we could, and there are words, many words that have been weaponized across the political spectrum. I mean, gosh, we're going to talk to a filmmaker about Nazis, literal and otherwise, in about 45 minutes time. But the language is so supercharged.
Yeah, absolutely. My mind is just boggling. Think about what's coming up in your show.
Yeah, I'm trying to mentally prepare for it.
yeah, but you're right. We want to be social. We shouldn't weaponize these things. Yeah. And like everybody wants to win the lottery, but you shouldn't bet your life on it because most of us lose. Playing the safe bet is not a bad way to get by. And that's why socialism is taking a bit of a bad rap right up until the pandemic, when it's the thing that seemed to make most of the countries who had strong social supports did very well with respect to the pandemic. It was the rugged individualists who, didn't do so well.
We've got some amazing comments here, which is no surprise on our live chat. You're getting people to think about a million things. It's just another form of your public service, Doctor. I know that today's a big day for you, and we've kept you longer than we asked you for. So please do. Here, let me pump the tires of this Edify feature. You can see it on my screen, edifyedmonton.com. I wouldn't say it was innovation. It was just commitment. Doctors redesign the ICU as COVID cases mount. You can read that at edifyedmonton.com. The feature there, the star of the piece, our guest, Dr. Darren Markland. Thanks for this, Doc.
It's a pleasure. Always a pleasure.
Mentioning the live chat, I'm just dropping in here. So there's a whole bunch, Sarah. I know you've been keeping an eye on it. I love this from Michelle, who says, RJ, I always wondered if the good Dr. Jesperson was your father. Yes. Well, I guess depending on which one you talk about. Dr. Reuben Jesperson, who was a surgeon in Edmonton for many years, was my great uncle, who inspired the career of my dad, Dr. Bruce Jesperson, who practiced down in Calgary up until, well, I guess about, what was it, a couple of years ago, I guess. It's coming up quick. Time flies. Scott says, 475 G's, not even close to the economic 1%. Have a look at oil executive compensation if you want to see the 1%. I think technically 475K a year would put you in the 1%, but that's not the point. The point is the point that Kathy makes on our live chat, where she says what they also don't say, these politicians, is that doctors pay for their clinics and run a business out of that money. They're not taking it all home. It would be the same thing as if somebody owned a restaurant and the restaurant generated $2 million in revenue annually, and you said, look at this rich restaurant. Hey, listen, first of all, I'm not here playing the world's tiniest violin for physicians. I'm not, okay? Physicians earn a great living, and they earn the money. And as a matter of fact, I think it's important that we compensate professionals, especially professionals with very specialized skills, in a way that ensures that we have the best and that we attract the best and that we keep the best. I think it's a smart investment. Don't get me wrong, though. I'm not crying for physicians now. I'm just making the point that a restaurateur that generates $2 million in revenue does not make $2 million. They pay for the food. They pay for the space. They pay for the staff, right? And so a physician is taking home much less than they bill Alberta Healthcare. That's an important perspective, and sometimes it needs to be stated because it's not always clearly and accurately stated. Troy says the Overton window has shifted. It's like a political spectrum. By the way, we once put in an interview request for the team, the think tank behind the Overton window. Actually, the gentleman that came up with it has since passed, but there's a think tank that kind of takes credit for it. Fascinating study. The Overton window, says Troy, has shifted so far right that anything to the left of hunting the poor for sport is considered socialist. That from Troy. I've never been called a communist so many times than in this past year. I mean, it's unbelievable. I want to talk to our filmmaker, Daniel Lombroso, coming up a little bit later on the show about words like Nazi, right? That are being thrown around. I fear that the worst case scenario is that the words lose their power and that they lose their significance, but sometimes the shoe fits at the same time.
Absolutely. I think I would argue that, sometimes people say, when there's a rule or there's something that they feel is strict, then they, imply or use terminology.
It's like the Third Reich.
Yeah. Exactly.
If you can't gather with 1,000 people in your church, it's like the Third Reich.
Yeah. It's just like, whoa, cool your jets.
An immunization passport is like asking Jews to wear the gold star, leading up to and during World War II, they will assert.
Yeah.
I mean, which do we even have to state the obvious? Maybe it's important to state it, that's not only ludicrous, but completely offensive and dancing on the graves of about 10 million people, including 6 million Jews. I mean, I think it's sometimes important we point that out. 2 Beaver on the live chat says the climate crisis is very real and moving in exponential fashion. We must be aware and prepared. Emma says, low taxes, but what's the true cost? The whole idea of penny wise, pound foolish. Donna says, I'd rather pay taxes so we can have a healthy society. This for online chats and online forums, I don't know why we've been blessed to have a community like this. Nicole says, that's a really nice guy. He makes total sense. What? How are we all of a sudden getting like calm, reasonable, and generous commentary on our live? What's happening here?
Well, I think there's been a community created, and
what is with these people?
To me, I really truly believe that we put our money where our mouth is. So what do we value? And do we value healthcare, high quality healthcare? Do we value education? Do we value any number of things? And if we do, then that's where, I work for a living and I will invest my money in what I value. Like, that's why I'm working. And so to me, taxes, they're inevitable. Where do the tax dollars then go? I would hope that they would go to things that are highly valuable and our investments in everyone.
Donna says communist, socialist, snowflake, comrade. I've heard them all. The Watcher says I have real contempt for people who use words like slave or Nazi casually. That's a great point. Yes. It's a great point. Jillian says the overuse of the word Nazi drives me crazy. There's such ignorance. I should read that she also says Sarah's right.
Thank you.
People are going to start accusing me of censorship if I don't read the full comment.
I've got a tally chart here where I hear Sarah's right.
That's right. Yeah, we're going to have down come Jay Bigham's phenomenal paintings and up goes a whiteboard so you can keep score. Kaylin, watching it from Vancouver this morning, says, wow, is Dr. Markland ever fantastic? That's the kind of high-level interconnected thinking. That's what we need from politicians. She says I could listen all day. Well, hey, stick around for the next, hour and a half or so. Great show to come. I appreciate this. From Lauren, who says, empathy. I lost his comment here. So, Lauren, I'm going to have to freewheel based on what I remember you said. But he said basically empathy can be a blessing and a curse for healthcare workers. It's the type of thing where you can be really, impacted. But Lauren, by the way, is a retired fire chief. So he comes at it from a position of lived experience. It can be a blessing and a curse. I can't imagine the emotion and the impact that so many people face. Pretty interesting stuff. Lauren, by the way, is the audience member that suggested we should get a tree in studio for Sarah to hug as she provides her commentary on various environmental issues. That's exactly what the team at Eden Landscaping did. You can find out their amazing work there. She is hugging her beautiful cherry tree. And
her name is Sherry.
So I wanted to ask you, because you had a personalized card that came with the tree.
Yes.
You don't have to share whatever if you'd like. I mean, we all want to read your mail, but so Sherry is the tree, not who the tree is from. Sherry's the tree.
Yes, this is Sherry, a crimson passion cherry tree. We chose her because not only will she be beautiful, she will bear flowers for pollinators, she will provide food, safety, and nesting space for birds, and she will be a great size for a city-sized yard.
There you go. Amazing.
Sherry.
You saw the email we got from Arden yesterday, by the way, who says I was contentedly listening to Real Talk while working hard outdoors, and my mouth fell open as I heard you describe, Ryan, native trees as a little bit boring. So I thought I better circle back on this and clarify. At no point did the team at Eden Landscaping describe native trees as boring. It was my characterization of the spirit of our conversation, where they were describing how, while this may not be a tree native to this part of the world, it could integrate nicely and create a little bit of diversity and a little pizzazz in your garden. I thought, you know what? If I'm speaking on behalf of a company, I better clarify they're not describing the native trees as boring. That was me, the civilian. Are we clear?
Way to go, Ryan.
Landscapeedmonton.ca is where you can learn more about Eden Landscaping and the amazing work that they're doing. Well, it's Wednesday today, and that means that it is time for MyJasper Moments. Starting today and for many Wednesdays to come, we are so excited to take you along with us collectively to the mountains. This is presented by our friends at Tourism Jasper. Right now, a lot of people that are observing all the COVID regulations and doing everything that they can to get in some exercise, to get in some fresh air, are looking to golf. And when I think of Jasper personally, I think of golf. Let me take you there. Let me take you onto the famed course, described as one of Canada's absolute best, at Canada's #1 rated golf resort. The Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge. This golf course is a bespoke creation of Canada's premier golf course architect. The name Stanley Thompson resonates around the world. And as the legend goes, when Stanley Thompson was developing the blueprint for this incredible course, he would walk the woods with a hatchet, with his cane, and with a bottle of gin. It's kind of how we came up with Real Talk. With 700 acres at his disposal, it took months before the renowned architect finally put pencil to paper. And the result, of course, if you've been there, is an exquisitely crafted golf course that was and remains on every golfer's global bucket list. It's coming up on 100 years old. It opened back in 1925 after 50 teams of horses and 200 workers spent a full year picking rocks, clearing boulders from the land. Can I show you present day? Sam, can you call up my tweet? This is one of my favorite tee boxes in the world. This is the 14th hole. Everybody knows the 14th hole. If you've golfed here, it jumps across the perfectly clear glacial waters of Lac Beauvert. That's my buddy Laws on the tee box. And I'll give him credit. He put this one straight down the pipe. I'm going to say about 260 yards.
Did he really?
Right in the middle of the fairway. Like I said, I'm going to say he put it right. Let's just say I've left a few Pro V1s in Lac Beauvert. Let's just say that. Although the good news for me on that tee box is that I slice right.
Okay.
So it keeps me on the fairway. I'll actually aim to the water. Which, like the pros, like Tal and Sweeney at the JPL will tell you, don't aim to compensate for your slice, because then when you hit a good shot, you're in trouble.
Right.
Right? I try to learn this. This is why I'm not a golf pro. I just play my slice. But this course, what sets it apart from a lot of new courses, if you know golf, you know that people, for example, that would criticize like a Bryson DeChambeau that say he's changing the game because he's just smashing it down the fairway, and par fives are now, realistically eagles and maybe even albatrosses. If these guys they're wrecking golf. Everybody's worried about golf. This track plays just under 6,700 yards, which means it can be completed by a whole bunch of different experience levels and many different playing styles, whether you hit it long, whether you putt short, every hole aligned with a phenomenal mountain vista. I'm mentally going back there right now. Let me just say this about that shot that I shared from the 14th tee box. This is how I can tell you about the connection I feel with this place and this golf course. That was right after I got fired. When I need to clear my head, when I need to get somewhere that puts me in a positive frame of mind, when all hell is breaking loose and it seems like the world is on fire, this tee box is where I find my peace. So word is from Tal, he's the director of golf operations out at the Fairmont. We checked in with him, and he says that the greens are fantastic right now, which will be a surprise to nobody, and that, of course, they're observing all COVID-19 protocols and leading in that department. It's important to them that they're able to keep Albertans and visitors golfing through the course of this. If you want to learn more about the MyJasper Memory partnership, you can check out jasper.travel/Real Talk. jasper.travel/Real Talk. And every Wednesday, join us here on the show for a MyJasper Memory. I could talk about golf for 3 hours. I've just opened up the door, and now all I want to talk about is golf.
Interesting.
Are we going to get out and do like a real time? You know what I envision? Like, we can't do it now. We can't do it yet. Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking, like, let me just plant the seed.
Okay.
I'm thinking real talk road trip.
Ooh.
Audience in. Right? Some form of partnership. I'm putting it on the record so the team at Tourism Jasper has to cooperate with us. I don't know when it's going to be. It's going to be back when we can all gather. So it's a little bit of time from now. Everybody get those needles in your arms. I'm talking about the vaccines. And I'm thinking we hit the highway. I'm thinking we do the show live out there. Maybe for like 1 or 2 or 5. I don't know.
Well, we might as well make it a week.
Maybe we do it. Maybe do like the Real Talk golf tournament. Who's
I'd be
in?
into that.
Who's in?
Well, you are hitting the golf balls. I will be in Jasper Park Lodge.
Yes.
Petting the dog.
Yes.
Because they have
they do
a hotel dog.
They do have a hotel dog. The doghouse is I've stayed in hostels smaller than the doghouse in the lobby at the Fairmont Jasper Park Lodge.
Yeah.
Right? People are saying it's blowing people's minds that I'm a righty. They can't believe I'm a right. Nicole wonders maybe we could do a Real Talk rodeo.
Yes.
That could be
the answer is yes.
It'd be interesting timing. It'd be interesting timing. And we've got some people. Dan says, Ryan, really? You find peace on that tee box? Really? You find peace on the 14th? Dan says, I mean, it's beautiful, but I can almost guarantee I'm taking a drop on the other side of the water. Yeah, Dan, I find my peace before I hit my drive. All right? And then I go right back to elevated blood pressure. But the JPL is the kind of course where, I mean, I golf a little bit differently than some. right? They're those that are going to like the low handicappers that are going to come in. They're going to want to shoot a 71, or they're going to want to shoot for a personal best at the JPL. And I'm the guy that's like, if it's gone, lost, I'm just like, still in Jasper. Fire up a cigar, drop a ball, the 19th mulligan of the round. Come in, shot an 81, boys, not bad, with 19 mulligans and 12 lost balls. So that's kind of where we go. But yeah, people are talking about where it clears your head. You can use the hashtag MyJasper and the hashtag RealTalkRJ if you want to connect us. And ultimately, what we'd love to do with the team at Tourism Jasper as well is tell your Jasper memories. And so we're going to be rolling out some cool contesting and promotions. And this is just week number 1, and we're really, really excited about it. Before we get into this next interview, I also wanted to take a moment to Real Talkers along with me as we enjoy a little surprise for the duo that keeps this show running and that keeps this show what it is, Sarah Hoyles and Samuel G. Brooks. You know that our family is really proud to do our grocery shopping at Friesen Brothers. And last night, Carrie, my lovely wife and fantastic partner in crime, was out at the Friesen Brothers in South Edmonton, the Rabbit Hill location. And I'm just going to throw my mask on here for a second because I'm going to, as a matter of fact, put something pretty special in front of these two. So Real Talkers, I talk all the time about these sourdough cinnamon buns, but like they kind of more speak for themselves. And so if you'll pardon me just for a second, Sarah Hoyles, your first impression upon seeing it.
Oh my goodness, this looks flippin' delicious. Wow.
Massive. All right, Sam, so you can take whatever camera you want, whether it's Sarah's or yours, but I thought we could get the opportunity here for a cinnamon bun cam would be great. Sam, you want to hold your cinnamon bun up to a camera there? You guys want to... This is no joke here, ladies and gentlemen. These sourdough cinnamon buns, unbelievable.
Yeah.
I even brought cutlery.
I was going to say, I was like, how am I supposed to...
There you go. Maybe I can put... Sam, you can come grab this when you can. They kind of speak for themselves. I'll just remind you that you can get your hands on these sourdough cinnamon buns. Can you put it in front? I just want it for the folks at home. I'm not trying to rub it in. I'm just saying, if you live in any one of the 15 Alberta communities where there's a Friesen Brothers, an amazing save by Sarah Hoyles. That was like we saw athlete Sarah there.
You sure did.
It was like a cat. That was just wow. Do you play baseball, softball, football? Are you like are you good with hand-eye?
Yeah, a bit of a jock. Bit of a jock over here.
That was a great save. That would have been tragic, let's be honest.
You would have seen me cry on camera.
Friesen Brothers, 15 Alberta locations for more than 65 years. Alberta grown and Alberta owned. All right, people are talking. This is the time of the season. When I'm talking to you about where people are going, or when we're getting emails from folks, you reflect that you've been looking forward to an opportunity to get outside, to get into the parks. A lot of people have been home for a long time. A lot of people have been isolating. Fresh air has been an opportunity that's maybe been limited for a lot of folks, and that's why I think, as we alluded to earlier, people connect with their parks in a very special way. I don't have to tell you that Alberta is going to start charging a user fee coming up pretty quickly. It goes into effect June 1st, as a matter of fact. So what is that, 3 weeks from now-ish? $90 a year, $15 a day. The Alberta government announcing what they're calling a conservation fee for access to the Kananaskis Provincial Park. Philip Turnbull is an outdoor adventure and travel blogger. He writes at zentravelers.com, and he's been kind enough to join us this morning. I love it. You come up on the camera and you've already got a smile from ear to ear. Is that what happens to you when we start talking about heading to the parks? It's what happens to me.
Yeah, absolutely, but I'm a little upset that you didn't send me a cinnamon bun.
I knew you were going to say that. And the worst part about it, Philip, in any other year, we built this studio to accommodate guests, and in any other year, you would be sitting here with me with a warmed cinnamon bun in front of you. So I apologize, and you've got one in the bank, my man. This story about user fees, it's been. How do I characterize this? Some people automatically think it's an absolutely terrible idea, and I think it's fair to say, to be objective, those same folks might also acknowledge that they believe that pretty much everything that this government has done is a terrible idea. In other words, they don't have to dig into the details. They hate the premise of it, they hate who's doing it, and they have suspicions around it. Then there are folks I'm hearing from that say, you know what, it might not be a bad idea if it goes into sustainability initiatives, if it allows us to keep the parks looking good, if it allows us to keep from closing parks or selling parks, I don't mind it. And then you have folks that are saying we should have more user fees. I don't use the park. I shouldn't pay for it. Where do you land on that spectrum?
I would say somewhere in the middle. I mean, I definitely think there's a lot of things that this government has gotten wrong, but I'm not so partisan that that I would look at it and say we absolutely shouldn't have user fees for parks. I can see an argument for it. But when you actually dig into it, unfortunately, that's not really the reality here. Our parks, definitely need funding, and maybe a user fee is a way to look to raise those funds. But when you look into it, despite the name, the funds are not actually going to conservation.
Okay, so take us into this, because this is a significant and important detail. What do we need to know?
So I mean, to start, with the name Conservation Pass, that's what you'd think, right? So the first big thing is the exclusion of the McLean Creek area. If we're truly looking for conservation in Kananaskis, which is absolutely important, and our parks need the funding for that, why would McLean Creek be excluded? I don't need to tell you that McLean Creek is a popular area for off-highway vehicles, and everybody knows that has a big impact on the environment and on the wildlife in the area. And in fact, Alberta Parks did a study back in December 2019 where they looked specifically at off-highway vehicle use, and they were able to confirm that that it does have a huge impact on the water and the sediment in the region, as well as the wildlife. So that's kind of the first thing. When you look at it, if it's about conservation, why is one of the areas that needs it the most excluded?
So do you? Sorry, go ahead. Continue, please.
And then when you look at the money, it doesn't add up either. So Jason Nixon said that this conservation pass is going to raise $15 million, which is a drop in the bucket compared to the Alberta budget. But so in 2019, the Alberta government cut $24 million from the parks budget, and this year you can see that the parks operating budget goes up $5 million. So, I'm no mathematician, but I think there's a missing $10 million there. And sure, some of that's going to capital projects, but not all of it. So if the funding was, truly going to Kananaskis, in terms of, providing better services and increasing conservation, I could see a good argument for this pass and for paying the fee. But it seems like most of the funding is just going to general revenue. And actually, when you look at the Alberta Parks budget, it's even with the conservation pass, it's lower than it was just in 2018 and 2019.
Do you, with regards to McLean Creek, and I make no bones about it. I'm not going to hide it. There's no reason to hide it. I've been going to McLean Creek for 25 years. I am an off-road enthusiast. It's all over my Instagram. People can see that. I will acknowledge, in the spirit of no bullshit, that there are a lot of problems out at McLean Creek. There's a lot of environmental impact that could be prevented. There's a lot of impaired driving. Obviously, police enforcement has ramped up. Anybody that's been out there in past years and now is familiar with it knows that there's way more RCMP than there used to be. Most people see that as a positive. Check stops going in and out. But you're right, it's a bit of a free-for-all out there. It's Crown land. It's exempted from the park fee. Do you think that there is some value in providing spaces like that where people have all... And don't get me wrong. I'm not talking about demolishing riparian zones. I'm not talking about severely impacting native fish species. I'm not talking about being a jerk. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about responsible, ethical off-roading, people that go in there as part of sustainability initiatives and outdoor enthusiast clubs that actually go in and clean the areas and do their best to mitigate or repair some of the damage that does happen. I've been part of it. I've seen it in action. Do you think that there is value in having zones or areas that are set aside for that, so the people that love, the thousands of Albertans that love dirt bikes and quads and side-by-sides and Jeeps and big mud boggers can get out with their families and pursue their interests? Or is this the type of thing that you'd like to see phased out entirely?
Yeah, I mean, I'm not 100% against, off-roading. Lots of people enjoy it. I know that you've talked about it in the past on the show. So yeah, I mean, people need those places, but unfortunately, the individuals that are not respecting the environment when they do that, they have a disproportionate impact on the area. And it just doesn't add up that this area is excluded from the conservation pass. I know that they've been talking about adding potentially a $30 fee, but still it just doesn't make sense. Why is it $90 to go have a picnic at Elbow Falls, and then it's only $30 to go off-roading in McLean Creek? The individuals that are doing it responsibly, more power to them. Unfortunately, that's not the case, with everyone, and that small percentage, ruin it for the rest of us.
Yeah, no, I think it's a fair comment. I posted this back in 2019. This was May long weekend in 2019, and I posted a photo. This is my rig, and we're up there having a little bit of fun in McLean. And I quoted John Muir: "Everybody needs beauty as well as bread, places to play in and pray in, where nature may heal and give strength to body and soul." And I remember a gal wrote in and said, "How dare you? How dare you invoke John Muir as you off-road through the Kananaskis?" And I realized not everybody sees eye to eye on this type of thing, and I don't take other perspectives lightly. Let's talk about the timing of this. June 1st, the fees come in. For a lot of families, there's existing plans. And for some people, we both know that some people aren't going to notice $90 out of the checking account. They won't even notice it's gone. Some people wouldn't notice $9,000 out of their checking account. For other people, this is a significant interruption of the plan.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the timing just seems like it was something that they came up on the back of a napkin and said, okay, let's implement this. Announcing it, they didn't even announce it. I think Emma Graney first wrote about it in the Globe and Mail. So that was the first that we heard about it. It wasn't in the budget. And in the budget, they did talk about increasing some camping fees. So people were aware of that, but people have made plans. So if you're going on a backpacking trip and in Kananaskis and you're going to be out there for multiple nights, well, now that's going to cost you $90 more. Despite the fact that you've already booked your campsites, expecting what it to be a certain price. They also talked about an exclusion for low-income people and for Indigenous peoples, which is that's obviously important. But when you actually look at the details, it's kind of sparse on what that really looks like. There's the only exclusion that I can see on the Conservation Pass website is for people on AISH, and there's nothing else for low-income people. So again, implementing it at the end of April, going live in June, we're still figuring out the details and what it actually looks like.
Philip, just to clarify, did you say that the only people, I didn't know this, the only people that are exempted from paying the pass or the fee are AISH recipients? That's it?
AISH recipients and Indigenous peoples, yeah. So Jason Nixon said that there was going to be an exemption for low-income people, but when you look on, I think it's alberta.ca/Kananaskis Conservation Pass, all it mentions is AISH and Indigenous peoples.
Kim says I've been a frequent, all caps, frequent Kananaskis visitor since I was born. She says 50 years of hiking, camping, visiting, working in the Kananaskis. She says I've been blessed. A user fee is fine if it goes back to the parks, but it won't. Randy, meantime, says the fee is just a carbon tax disguised. So the government that said no carbon tax in Alberta now has 3 carbon taxes. You remember, I mean, one of the huge criticisms, I mean, this is just a fact. Facts are inconvenient for politicians, but one of the biggest protests around Rachel Notley's carbon tax was that a significant part of it went back into general revenues. Conservatives' heads were exploding. And now you're telling me that the exact same thing is happening here. So where do you figure this goes? Like, I mean, even with regards to, what do you call it? Like population management or visitor management? Like, I was blown away. Weren't you to hear that? Did they say that it's 4 million? Banff saw 4 million visitors annually last year, and the Kananaskis saw 5? That knocked my socks off. That more people did. Were you surprised by that or no?
I mean, obviously it's a big number. I wasn't entirely surprised. We've seen that happening, over the past years, and especially last year, we definitely, saw parking lots were full. There were a lot of new users in Kananaskis. So I'm not denying that overuse is a problem in Kananaskis. The area has been being loved to death in some ways, but there might have been a little bit of something going on in 2020. I don't know, this coronavirus pandemic. Maybe you heard about it. I think cherry picking one single year where nobody could travel internationally and everybody was looking for something to do outside, probably isn't the fairest comparison. But that said, usage is definitely going up in Kananaskis, and that's a problem. But singling out Kananaskis for the conservation pass isn't really the solution to solving that problem. There's a huge demand for people to get outdoors and explore nature, and we're just going to see instead of going to Kananaskis, people are going to go to other areas that might not have the resources or the setup to handle that same number of users. BC is seeing exactly that. They implemented not a user fee, but a registration system for 6 of their most popular provincial parks. And instead of going to those specific 6 parks, people are going out further, going to different areas that don't have the resources. Maybe they're going out, further into the backcountry and needing to get rescued. So singling out a single area, the demand is still going to be there, and people are going to find a way to get outdoors. So that doesn't make sense in my mind either.
Well, it's a good point here from some random guy on our live chat. That's his name. Says if you charge, well, I better read the full comment. Sarah was right on the first day she joined. It's gonna
Sarah was right.
Sarah was right. If you charge for every site, says some random guy, if you charge for every site except McLean Creek, then everyone will go to McLean Creek. That's free market, baby, says some random guy. So what would you like to see happen here? I don't think anybody is going to acknowledge that there's budgetary. What do I say? How do I put this? There are tells in the provincial budget. There are tells in what this government will spend public dollars on and what it'll finance and what it will charge the public to finance. And here it's a park fee to support the parks. Whereas, we're subsidizing advocacy for the traditional oil and gas industry out of our own pocket. So, I mean, there's an example of priorities. What do you think would be a smart move? What would you like to see the government doing in the spirit of protecting the parks and sustainability across the board, fiscally, environmentally, and otherwise?
I mean, to start with, funding the parks properly. But, if I was in charge and I had to keep this conservation pass, a couple quick things that would make a huge difference in my mind. It should apply to all parks in Alberta, not just Kananaskis. The resources are going to go to the entire province. So it should be, kind of spread out across all parks. That's consistent with what other provinces that have a provincial park fee do as well. We need to look at the low income exemption. Like we talked about, it excludes AISH, but the details on, the rest of the low income exemption, aren't there. And we want to make sure that people have access to Kananaskis. That's, it's Albertans' backyard. We love it. So we want to make sure that people are able to access it regardless of their income. Maybe a more reasonable fee. But I think most importantly, transparency on where the funding goes is going to be most important here. I said at the top that I'm not 100% against paying for backcountry usage, but we need to know that the funding is actually going to parks, that it's going to conservation, that it's going to increasing services in the areas. And then another consideration is that a lot of trail or a lot of volunteer organizations that work with conservation and trail maintenance, those are volunteer driven and donation driven. So some of the funding should probably go to organizations like that as well, because people aren't going to donate, if they're already paying $90 to go to the park.
Sure. But I'm sorry, not happening. Jason Kenney should fund environmental activism groups. Like, really? Like, you and I both know that there's not a chance in hell of that happening. I do appreciate you putting it in front of us, but we both know that that's not happening. I don't mean to be pessimistic. I'm just being realistic. Yeah.
Well, and speaking of pessimism, the easiest solution here is just cut the war room and give the funding to parks.
Yeah.
That's the war room is double what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So $30 million to parks. I'm in.
Yeah, I know, but if you cancel the war room, how are you going to pay your friends? Right? It's tough because you lose your slush fund. It's tough. Philip, you and your wife do an absolutely amazing job at zentravelers.com. You can catch his feature back on May 6th, just coming up on a week ago. Again, Alberta's new Kananaskis Conservation Pass. And I love this, by the way, your camping on Moline Lake feature. We spent some time talking about Jasper and getting out there camping on Moline Lake. Just an absolutely incredible experience as well. Philip, I really enjoyed talking to you. Any excuse to mentally get outdoors, we take it. Thanks for this.
Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, you bet. That's Philip Turnbull. I got all the time in the world for people whose passion extends into advocacy, and he does a great job there on his site. I encourage you to check it out. Wanted to give a shout out, speaking of getting outdoors, if your summer is going to include a road trip and you're going to be pulling a boat, you're going to be pulling a trailer, maybe the first one ever. Whole bunch of our friends have gotten in from the used game. A couple of them so thrilled to find a couple hidden gems for like just a few grand, and they're gonna do the rent. They're gonna renovate the inside of the trailer themselves, and then our neighbor just brand spanking new. Like, I'm sitting there looking at his like, whoo-wee. You need something to pull it with, and Ram trucks have been trusted by Canadians for years and years. The 3-time Motor Trend Truck of the Year. Right now, they're tough to find, as a matter of fact. There's been a real run on pickups, the 3/4 tons, the 1 tons that allow you to pull whatever you're pulling without a second thought. The best selection in Alberta remains at the 2 dealerships in partnership, St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. When you want to talk Ram, you want to talk to the teams at St. Albert and Sherwood Dodge. You can link to them on our website under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. Also, big shout out to our friends at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. They know that the other Dairy Queen owners are not happy with them because they are offering right now for the rest of May peanut butter parfaits for $1.99. Now, don't trust my exact math, but that's coming up on like 65% off. That's like a major price slash for the month of May only. The peanut butter parfait. Let me just read this. Layers of creamy vanilla soft serve, rich hot fudge, and peanuts, topped off with Dairy Queen's trademark curl and, of course, the red spoon. $1.99 peanut butter parfaits at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Samuel Brooks, I can tell this is resonating with you.
Well, I mean, I, among many other people, just enjoy the sheer decadence that is the peanut butter parfait. I'm a little worried about Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park because they're not going to make any money off of those. They're basically giving them away.
I mean, at the peek behind the curtain here, they've not told me this, but I have to assume this is what would qualify as a loss leader.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So like while you're there, load up on like 11 orders of French fries, onion rings, a couple of the big off the DQ grill. I mean, a couple of, like, basically what I'm saying is go in there and spend about $90, but save $5 or so on the peanut butter parfait. I want to talk about that for the rest of the day. We could do it.
I really want to get some like sensual music while you read about the peanut butter parfait.
Oh, is that right?
Just the way that you were, talking about the red spoon.
Sam, what if we, I know I'm putting you on the spot here, but do you think you could load up the alternative music for Kubi Energy's Positive Reflections, the one that we did not use?
That's the opposite of sensual music.
Hey, I'm a professional communicator. You work with me here for a second, you guys. Can you please give me the bed? Here's what we're talking about, all right? We'll give Sam a second.
Oh boy, here we go.
Layers of creamy vanilla soft serve with that rich hot fudge and peanuts topped off with Dairy Queen's trademark curl. And of course, the red spoon. It's the peanut butter parfait for $1.99 at the Dairy Queens of Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. How's that? Is that something like that? We could get down on it? Like, no?
I mean, you really sold it. You really, you gave your all.
I put my the 10 out of 10 on the effort. Capital E for effort.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Let's stop the feedback there. Thank you very much.
I'm just going to stop you there.
I don't know if my confidence can take the hit.
Could we just, if there's another, let's just say there's another day that you're going to do talking about the peanut butter parfait. Could we try the sensual music?
We could. I mean, I wouldn't be against it. I wouldn't be against it.
Can you humor me?
I'm thinking that when I get to rich, hot fudge,
exactly,
it's gonna really go to a different level. Jonathan wrote in to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Sometimes you've just got a hard segue out. You've just got to turn the page. Speaking of the trademark curl, Jonathan, no. He was paying attention to yesterday's show, and we were talking about public transit. It was a fantastic conversation, and public transit across Canada, really enjoyed it. Great booking by Sarah, and he says transit in cities, says Jonathan, everybody moans and complains, that transit's a joke or that it doesn't reach everybody. People in the suburbs complain that they have no regular buses. To that, I say, too bad. Urban sprawl has caused so many issues, and this is one of them. People want to live in the burbs for whatever reason. Prices of homes, it's quieter. They're away from the hustle and bustle. But people need to do their homework and weigh the pros and cons. The pros, you're quiet. You're close to, I don't know what suburb is quiet, but I get what he's saying. But young family, anyway, I digress. Back to Jonathan. You're close to amenity hubs like grocery stores and things like that, but one of the cons is lack of access to transit and longer commute times. You can't have everything. He says, my wife and I moved into a certain area of town because of its access to transit and its proximity to all the things that we value. We're close to our family. We're close to pedestrian shopping areas. We're close to downtown. We made the choice knowing it would cost a bit more, but we did our homework. Spreading out resources doesn't help. We need to build up, not out. And people can't have their cake and eat it too. You shouldn't live in the burbs if you want transit. I kind of disagree here, but I'm going to keep reading the email. You shouldn't live in the burbs if you want transit, just like you shouldn't live in the city center if you want quiet. He says, I recognize this sounds more like trash talk. It's too reasonable for trash talk. He says, but people need to understand it's a choice to live where they live, and they need to live with everything that comes with it, good and not so good. That from Jonathan. Your thoughts?
I mean, I think it's important to, live close to what you love. So I value parks and I value amenities. I value community, so I want to be in and amongst folks. I don't want, although, my mom grew up on a farm and I spent every summer out on a farm with one of my aunts and uncles. So, and I don't know if I agree with the premise, which you pointed out, that suburbs are quiet, cities are noisy.
I can understand people saying, a lot of people will say, the suburban sprawl is a strain on a city because you've got to expand emergency services. You got to build new cop shops. You got to build new fire halls.
Roads.
Ultimately, you've got to, roads, obviously sewer expansion, hospitals,
power,
the whole 9 yards, right? The whole 9 yards. And you've got to expand transit as well. At the same time, a neighborhood like we live in where there's neighborhood rejuvenation or renewal happening because there's houses that are 110 years old, that also costs money, right? And some of it is paid for by us. We got new street lamps, we got new sidewalks, but we paid for it as part of a levy. You can't opt out. Everybody paid into it. But bigger things like overhauling sewer infrastructure, that's also a cost on a city. So you could make those arguments. People talk about, for example, schools in heritage neighborhoods. They see enrollment dwindling for whatever reason, whether the neighborhood is cost prohibitive for young families or whether young families prioritize the suburbs like Jonathan wrote about. And then people will talk about allocating resources and we're building new schools while we're closing old ones and it doesn't make sense. And you can really open a whole bunch of different conversations on this. Sam, I don't know. It seemed to me, I saw your body language out of the corner of my eye that it seemed to resonate with you a little bit where he said, if you want to live in the suburbs, don't expect transit.
I say this because I grew up with that reality. I grew up in like older Riverbend, Terwilliger part of the city, and transit sucks out there, and it still sucks out there. We just did the bus network redesign, and it's actually less serviced in that area. But I also think of it as being this sort of. I also have vivid memories of getting on a bus and being on this bus for an hour and there's 3 people on it.
Yeah.
And it's sort of hard to reconcile that because there are scarce resources at play here. I think that there's a couple just sort of like general things that make the problem worse. One of which is the idea of suburbs, particularly areas that are part of the city municipality, but just sort of on the outlying areas. They tend not to be built in grids. They tend to be built in cul-de-sacs with windy streets all over the place. And, I remember from my parents' house to the bus stop, well, as the crow flies, it was probably about 200 meters. But in reality, you had to walk about a kilometer to get there. So I think that we need to rethink the way that we make these communities because an area that has those winding streets like that's a traffic calming measure. That's assuming everybody drives. So let's make the neighborhood in a way where people are forced to slow down and keep the neighborhood safe. That's sort of why districts are designed like that, right?
James Wilt yesterday, I thought it was interesting. He's sort of, I don't want to speak for him, but boy, was he impressive. His commentary on public transit and city design and all these types of things. But he's inherently, you get the sense, I'm not speaking for him, but he's inherently against or concerned about the idea of microtransit and the idea of integrating things like ride shares or whatever you call them, ride services like Uber or whatever, in partnership with transit infrastructure. I'm not sure I feel the same way about that. I think that, and I'm not sure I'm an advocate for it either. But I do think, I think there needs to be a public element to public transit, but I'm also on the record that I'm not the type of person that's 100% inherently against different forms of healthcare delivery. I'm not inherently against private schools. Sarah Hoyles is just blood pressure rising, but hey man, you applied to work on this show, not the other way around. But in all seriousness,
ding,
no.
dong.
But that's a position that I take that I understand is not popular with people. That's how I'm wired. I don't see I can see some concerns that would need to be addressed, but I don't inherently have a problem with investigating different ways of service delivery, especially if it can be more cost efficient for something that's publicly subsidized. I think public subsidies are important, but I think we need to be good stewards of that money. And that, in my mind, needs to involve being open-minded on exploring other methods of delivery.
Absolutely. I don't want to, I'm not of the mindset that it's like, well, we've always done it this way, so we need to always do it this way. To me, I don't want to come across as that. Like, we need to just stick with what we have.
I don't think you do come across that way.
Phew. But I don't know. I'm with the rideshare idea. My concern is looking at, and maybe this is a stretch, but looking at privatized healthcare and looking at, something that happened in Canada and is very much top of mind, seniors facilities, when they're privatized, where is the accountability and the ability to, make sure that everyone gets a fair shake?
Yeah.
It's who can afford it as opposed to is it available?
Yeah.
For everyone.
And these are important conversations. 100%. Doug says we live in the suburbs because it's affordable for us. And there's a lot of other families with young kids and parks and schools. And Doug says we don't expect to have good transit service. I don't blame people, especially people with young families, whatever. It doesn't matter what your circumstance is. But if it's going to, if a single detached home with a backyard in the city center is going to cost, it depends, right? We have audience members in Vancouver. A single detached home with a backyard close to the city center is $3 million, right? In Calgary, it might be $750. In Toronto, it might be $1 million. But then you start to talk in the suburbs, and those prices can literally cut in half or cut by 40%. And you don't blame people for looking for that. And there are these trade-offs, right? Arnold Palmer says, how can you integrate ride shares to transit? Says they're absurdly costly. And says, Ryan, you also said you don't take transit. And then he goes on to say, leave public transit public. Fair. But maybe, if we go back, one of the reasons I don't take transit is because it's not convenient and it doesn't make sense for me personally to take transit. And another thing is, leave public transit public, sure. And the best way to ensure that you are able to leave it public is with public support. And the best way to maintain public support is to prove that you're spending the money wisely. And I just think that there needs to be those conversations. This is like one of a million stories that we're keeping an eye on. Sarah, what else are we following this morning? I know you got a few things right at the top of your list.
Yeah, the biggest one, I think right now, well, there's so many, but the one that's like popping off right now is Liz Cheney. She's with the Republican Party. She's just been voted out of her position of leadership in that party. So it was a closed door meeting. And we don't know, the ballots were, you weren't able to see who cast what. But this morning, House Republicans took a vote to remove Cheney from her position. The actual position is Republican Conference Chair. So she's out.
And they're described as a career-threatening move. One of the things that's pretty interesting, though, this is after she repeatedly rebuked former President Donald Trump for his false claims of election fraud and his role in inciting the January 6th Capitol attack. I would suspect that Representative Cheney out of Wyoming is probably going to at least be looking in the mirror right now and saying, well, I'm pretty sure that at least I'll wind up on the right side of history on this one.
And that's precisely what she said. She's like, this is a hill to die on.
Yeah.
I am willing to be... long-term, big picture, I'm willing to let go of because if this is the way the party is going, the funny thing is though, is because she did vote to impeach as well. The funny thing is that she is not anywhere close to center. She is very conservative.
Sure.
She is the daughter of Dick Cheney.
Yeah.
And she holds several of, she aligns with her father.
She's a prominent Republican.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I guess the person that they're looking at potentially replacing her with is less conservative, on the spectrum. So it's a wild, but anyways.
The reinvention or the restructuring or the same old thing with the Republican Party is going to be fascinating to watch. Or if you didn't catch our conversation with the other Jason Kenney the other day, you're going to want to make sure you watch it. He describes himself as a pre-Trump Republican. And from his home in Richmond, Virginia, he talked to us about where he sees the Republican Party going and those that are still loyal to Donald Trump, who, of course, what did he get, 74 million votes or something like that. It's not like they got walloped. 74 million votes for Trump. Now, Jason and I talked about that, how he acknowledged that a lot of those are just people that aren't going to vote Democrat, so they're going to vote Republican. They're going to plug their nose and vote. But at the same time, it'll be fascinating to watch. This is a great time to remind you that our friends at Grand Dog Essentials are delivering every single week quality raw dog food to their customers in Calgary, in Edmonton, and across central Alberta. Customers that have checked out granddog.ca, I hope you're using the promo code REALTALK to get 10% knocked off your first time order. Sarah's pup, Ranger, right?
You betcha.
Ours, Moses and Monroe, they're all on Grand Dog Essentials quality raw food, and we see the returns every single day in their digestive health, in the quality of their coats. Monroe, our black lab, is a showstopper. Her coat has never looked so good.
A showstopper.
We'd show our dogs, but I don't know if either I or the dogs could behave well enough to be a part of that thing. But she's a showstopper nonetheless, and that's because we consult with the team at Grand Dog. Monroe especially has some unique nutritional needs, and they've been able to answer our questions and basically prescribe the best raw diet possible. We trust Grand Dog, and you can too. They're a great friend of this show, Real Talk, and you can find them under the sponsors tab at ryanjesperson.com. We're also very proud, at Real Talk, to be the presenting sponsor of the Global Visions film series at this year's Northwest Fest International Documentary Festival. Now, it may not be happening at Metro Cinema this year, but the show does go on. As we've been telling you, you can watch more than 40 feature films plus 40 short films anywhere up until May 16th. That's when the festival wraps. Shows including Hail to the Deadites. That's a love letter to fans of Evil Dead, made by Evil Dead fans, exploring the love affair with Sam Raimi's iconic horror franchise. Or what about Not Going Quietly, the emotional story of rising young political star Ady Barkan's devastating ALS diagnosis and his fight for American healthcare reform. And then, of course, there's White Noise, the definitive, explosive chronicle of the rise of the alt-right as told by its most high-profile figures. You can learn more about all the films and buy your tickets right now at northwestfest.ca. I don't know what to expect in this conversation. I have been anticipating. I have so many questions for our next guest. He's the filmmaker behind White Noise. It's Daniel Lombroso's debut feature film based on 4 years of reporting inside the alt-right. It's the Atlantic's first feature documentary. Before we meet Daniel and welcome him to the show, here is a scene from White Noise.
I'm going to introduce the man himself, our good friend and spokesperson for white people everywhere, Mr. Richard Spencer. Thank you.
We created the United States, and I'm referring to white people, white men in particular. And you all know that. You all think this country is racist, right?
So, Mr. Spencer, you have a right to free speech, but you don't have the right to incite violence. I get it. You don't directly say, kill black people, kill Jews, whatever, but your followers seem to take the idea of a white-only ethno-state to heart, and they are the ones going out and committing violent acts in your name and in the name of your movement. So
name a single...
My question is, how do you respond to people who feel that you should take responsibility for the actions of others, that your words...
What are you referring to? Name a single incident in which some alt-rightist went out and murdered someone.
Charlottesville, you organized that rally. People came with riot gear and someone died. And that was under the name of your movement. How do you not take responsibility for the actions of those people?
Absolutely not. What exactly happened with the death of Heather Heyer remains unclear. You know that what I am saying is true. You know that what I am saying is powerful. You know that what I am saying is going to change the world. And therefore, you all want to stop it.
Daniel Lombroso is the director of White Noise, joining us live this morning on Real Talk. Daniel, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
I literally have chills, and that is the fourth time I've watched that scene. The fourth time I've seen it. I can't even imagine what this filmmaking experience was like for you. How did this first get started?
So I was one of the first reporters in the United States to start covering the alt-right. At the time, the group was not being taken seriously. They were seen as kind of a new, edgy, fun kind of conservatism. You know, they were young and very internet savvy. You might remember Milo Yiannopoulos and some of the names that were popular at the time. You know, I was a bit younger in the Atlantic's newsroom. I'm also Jewish. Both my grandmothers are Holocaust survivors. And I saw what was happening. I saw this huge amount of energy behind President Trump, then candidate Trump. And I said to my editors at the Atlantic, we need to take this seriously. We need to cover it. We should be putting our resources here. So it began with a few short profiles and documentaries. In one of them, I caught a room full of people breaking out into Nazi salutes. It's in the film, but you might also remember it from 5 years ago because we put it out as a viral clip. And it was really important journalism because it clarified that this was a racist movement, an anti-Semitic movement. It wasn't a fun kind of conservatism. Charlottesville happened about 8 months after that, August of 2017. When that happened, it was obvious that this movement was only growing in strength and demanded something, you know, as deeply reported as a feature film.
It's remarkable. I was saying this earlier to our audience about an hour ago when we first the show kicked off. I said this is not a documentary where Daniel and his team cherry pick a bunch of clips out of YouTube and then use stock footage and B-roll and narrate some. You are in the cars with these thought leaders, these political influencers. You're behind the scenes. You are backstage with Richard Spencer and with Mike Cernovich and with Lauren Southern, and you're on Gavin McInnes's TV, the set of his show. I mean, how did you gain this access? Did you do it? I have to ask the question. I mean, did you do it in good faith? I assume you're a journalist. I'm assuming you're not misrepresenting yourself, but your access was incredible.
Yeah, the access is one of a kind, and the film is really, I think, a primary source document. The hope is that, 10, 20 years from now, historians, students look back at this film and say, we can't deny what happened in these 4 years of the Trump administration and beyond, that racists and conspiracy theorists were empowered by social media, empowered by a president in the US, but also a far right in Europe. And they reached kind of mainstream legitimacy like never before. Access was just a slow, rigorous effort at gaining their trust. And anyone who, is a documentary filmmaker or investigative journalist is familiar with this. You just keep showing up, you keep pitching them, you keep telling them I'm sincere. And I think the film, reflects that. Like you said, there's no narration. We contextualize what happens through montage, through their own sound bites. And I think ultimately show how delusional they are, how broken they are emotionally. But I was able to do that, and The Atlantic was able to do that through rigorous journalism and through access. This is the only film, like I said, that has this level of access. And just to make it super clear, the boundaries were always there. I was there to listen. I was there to understand, but I was not their friend. I didn't promise them any kind of coverage. None of them saw the film until it premiered at a festival last year. And none of them were happy with the film. We had complete editorial independence.
I don't want to ruin. Your storytelling is masterful, and so I'm going to preserve the viewer experience. But I would imagine you say none of these subjects are happy with you. I would imagine probably right at the top of that list is Gavin McInnes. Have you had any interactions with the subjects of your film, and have they gone on the record with anything that might indicate that there are some plans for some form of response, retaliation, or otherwise?
Yeah, I can't go into too much detail, but they're not happy with it. The film is accurate, and it's an accurate reflection of this movement, but it's difficult for people to look in the mirror sometimes and see their hypocrisies as glaring as they are. And I don't know if you're trying to avoid spoilers here, but some of these hypocrisies are so glaring. Mike Cernovich tweets diversity is code word for white genocide. You find out that he has a non-white wife and biracial kids who speak Farsi at home. They're half Persian. Lauren Southern, is shaming sexual assault survivors and then has to deal with sexual harassment herself, doesn't know what to do with it. And there's an even more dramatic reveal at the end of the film with her that I don't want to give away.
Yeah, that was what I was trying to preserve, which my jaw hit the floor. Number one, I'm just going to say this, and then I'm going to leave it at this. I couldn't believe she didn't put her hand over your camera lens and say, shut it off right now. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe that you were still rolling on it. I couldn't believe... Wow. People can find it. If people want to watch it, northwestfest.ca, you have to watch it. At what point, Charlottesville was the turning point for a lot of people, where this was no longer something that was like, the guy that I grew up with, he's wearing sort of like a Hitler-esque kind of a close, tight shave, or he's wearing the telltale, white pressed shirt with the khaki pants, or he just loaded up on tiki torches at Lowe's or whatever. I mean, Charlottesville, where it all of a sudden became very real, right? Where Canadian politicians that had posed with, like Kerry Diott, his photos, Canadian MP, posing with Faith Goldie, all of a sudden that was a very inconvenient photo to have out there, because Faith Goldie was down there reporting in deplorable fashion, so bad that some of her friends, like Rebel Media, had to drop her up here, and that's saying something. It was a wake-up call for a ton of people, and you eulogize the young woman who lost her life down there as a result of that dramatic the homicide by vehicle that everybody remembers. For you as a filmmaker, we need to remember that your journey, this was occurring in real time. Like this is a look back over the last 4 years. How significant in your process was Charlottesville.
Charlottesville was a hinge moment for the movement. I mean, they reached mainstream legitimacy through President Trump. They were rising and rising and rising in parallel. Charlottesville was a PR disaster. I mean, they're a movement dedicated to preserving white power in the United States, in Canada, certainly in Europe. It's really a transnational movement, and all countries that are majority white, they're concerned are becoming too multicultural, even though, you know, all of our societies, the US and Canada, are founded as immigrant societies, as places that people should come. You know, they were really making inroads, and I would say continue to make inroads. It's a longer conversation in the Republican Party, but Charlottesville was just a PR nightmare in the way that January 6th was also a PR nightmare, the storming of the Capitol. You know, it was an indefensible act. They brazenly killed a young white protester. And you see our subjects in the film openly inciting violence in Charlottesville. But, you know, many of them are talking openly about white replacement, the ideas that whites are being replaced. We then saw killings in New Zealand, in New Zealand at a mosque, in Pittsburgh at a synagogue, in El Paso in an effort to target Mexicans. And all of those shooters also left manifestos. And those manifestos like were almost word for word the types of things that my subjects say about migrant invasions and white replacement. So Charlottesville, I think, you know, started to make it harder for them to organize, to raise money, but the kind of the violence they unleashed just continued and remains, you know, the major domestic terrorism threat in America and also overseas. I mean, these people aren't going anywhere, and they're willing to do anything they need, you know, to achieve their ends, which is to preserve a white majority.
Where do you see this going? Because I mean, you have these chilling clips. You're talking to Richard Spencer, you know, this white nationalist leader, or perceived leader anyway, who talks about, you know, sometimes, and I can't quote him directly, I'm sure you could, through the edit process, you've probably seen it 300 times, but doesn't he say something about sometimes there is blood and tears, or something like he has this kind of ominous statement near the end of the film where he kind of alludes to this. Whereas at the same time, and I don't want to read too much into people's individual circumstances, but you've got Mike Cernovich hawking, you know, personal beauty and wellness products, right? Instead of talking about, you know, misogyny and date rape and all the other deplorable stuff. You know, you got Lauren Southern who sort of takes a moment away, and she's back in Vancouver, and she's, you know, with child, and she appears, or you portray her to be chilled out a little bit. And then you've got, you know, Southern himself, you know, living with his mom in Montana, wearing a Norwegian sweater, sitting behind a piano, and sort of seems to be somewhat out of the spotlight. One might be led to believe that this was somewhat of a flash in the pan under a Trump presidency, but I would suspect that people that assume that is the case might do so at their own peril. What do you think?
I agree with that assessment. I mean, the film ends with somewhat of an optimistic note as it relates to these three individuals. These are deeply narcissistic people who basically laid their own graves, who hung themselves both metaphorically in my film, but also in their own careers. I mean, it's going to be difficult for them to work again, to get a job. You know, Cernovich will always find a way to get by, pivoting from one thing to another. He pivots from alt-right, then it becomes a negative term. So he's, you know, center-right, and he's selling supplements, and now he's this and he's that. And Lauren Southern, you know, being quite privileged and now having a married partner and a child, can recede from life and live somewhat comfortably. That being said, even though we should, you know, feel some, I guess, joy or pleasure in the fact that these individuals have indeed fallen, the ideas they represent, I believe, are now more mainstream than ever before. They were embedded in the modern Republican Party. I mean, I heard your previous segment about Liz Cheney. It illustrates it pretty well. You know, she refused to tell the big lie that Trump, you know, lost the election. She says he lost, and she's now being kicked out of the party, basically. She's losing her leadership position. The largest TV show in the United States now is Tucker Carlson. He's saying things that, you know, my subjects were saying to me 3 or 4 years ago, things that were not on TV about migrant invasions and migrant caravans. Tucker Carlson is saying it every night on Fox News to millions and millions of viewers. You know, Richard Spencer is never going to be the Republican Party, but a slightly diluted version is something that we're left with, something that resembles maybe Mike Cernovich or Lauren Southern. And even if Trump fades into the background like it seems like he is, I think the future of the conservative movement resembles someone like Lauren much more than it resembles Mitt Romney or George Bush or the stuff that we grew up with.
We've been talking, and this isn't just today, obviously, the conversation for a long time, and audience members have been chiming in on words that we see or hear invoked more frequently these days, and that includes Nazi, slave, commie, communist, socialist. I mean, these are words that people fling around, fascist, for that matter. And we've been having an interesting discussion or a debate around whether or not those words fit, and we selected that clip on purpose. Out of the gates here, Richard Spencer's appearance essentially taken over by counter-protesters, counter-demonstrators who essentially demand that he leave, who silence him, who cancel him in a way. And the gal asking him, by the way, quite articulate, I thought she was, essentially, calling him a Nazi, and he's going, what? Me? Huh? Right? Me? I'm not a Nazi. I want to localize an example. I recognize that we're talking to you. Are you in New York City right now? Is that where we're talking to you from?
I'm in New York, but I went to school in Canada.
Oh, where'd you go?
I went to McGill, so I'm familiar with Canadian politics.
Oh, great. Oh, wonderful. Yeah. Another proud grad of McGill. So you probably are aware, at least to a certain degree, of what's going on in Alberta. Alberta leads case numbers in COVID by a mile, nearly double of Ontario's per capita, et cetera. And Alberta also has some of the most prominent anti-mask demonstrations. We've had mass gatherings in protest of public health orders, including rodeos and church services, and basically every stereotype that you could possibly ever draw up about this part of Canada is playing itself out in real time. Just last weekend, a man well known to both civilians and law enforcement, his name is Artur Pawlowski, was taken into custody, as a matter of fact, in a dramatic takedown on the side of a freeway by Calgary police officers who cuffed him and carried him off for encouraging people to gather at a church service. And of course, all the usual suspects have come forward raising money, they say, for his legal defense, although we know that that's not always where the funds go. Here you can see the arrest just off Deerfoot Trail in South Calgary. That's members of the Calgary Police Service taking him into custody. The video posted by his supporters and his team. I believe his brother shot the video and posted on Facebook. Well, people are calling him a Nazi. And people will say, well, I don't know if that really fits. And I want to credit this Twitter account, Fighting for Alberta, that's tweeted to us at our hashtag RealTalkRJ as we're talking to you this morning. They say, here's the photo. This is what I'm talking about. Calling some of these people Nazis is not an over-the-top reaction. This is Artur Pawlowski at Calgary City Hall at an anti-mask rally in Calgary. I mean, there's no other way to describe that except for the Nazi salute. He's surrounded by fellas that are holding tiki torches. I mean, in your mind, in that scenario, does the label Nazi fit?
It's hard for me to say. I just don't know enough of the context, even though you did a great job explaining. I think for me, Nazi is a dangerous word with a lot of power and should be reserved for, sincere instances of Nazism. Richard Spencer, I think, is a neo-Nazi. He styles himself based on 20th century fascists like Hitler, like Mussolini. He takes direct inspiration from them. And like Nazis, he believes in the superiority of whiteness. He believes that other cultures are less than whites, and that whites don't only need to preserve their demographics the way that the Cernovich might say, or Lauren would say. He believes in imperialism. He believes in conquering other groups of people. And he also believes in ethnic cleansing. He called it peaceful ethnic cleansing, the idea that we can pay people to leave. But what he means by that are minority groups, Muslims and Jews. Even if those Muslims and Jews are white looking, they're considered of Semitic origin. It might surprise you, but Jews in the alt-right are not considered white. They would have to leave in the eventual white ethno-state. So that is Nazism. Lauren Southern, I would say is a white nationalist. She believes in preserving white demographics. And Cernovich, who seems the most moderate on racial issues, flirts with that stuff as it's convenient. But of course, he also is a misogynist and a conspiracy theorist, so it doesn't make him necessarily better. He's just not a Nazi. So, I use the word, I really reserve it for people who believe in ethnic cleansing in one way or another. And Richard Spencer does, and some of his followers do, and others are white nationalists. And I know it sounds weird to kind of divide them, but there is somewhat of a difference. And it's important that things, keep, I think, their historical context to some extent. We use words a lot now that don't necessarily have the meaning they were intended to have, like concentration camp or racist or Nazi. But as they apply to Richard, I think it's a pretty accurate depiction.
Yeah. Yeah, we've had some, we've had, there's a pretty high profile, who Ezra Levant is, I'm sure, the founder of Rebel Media, co-founder, a Jewish man who was invoking the Holocaust in his commentary on the arrest of Mr. Pavlovsky last weekend, right? Talking about finding Anne Frank and Check the Attic and heavily armed police coming after Jews. And it was just these things get torqued to a point. I can see that you have a visceral response to that. What's going through your mind?
Yeah, it's not productive at all. Ezra Levant is like a far right hack, obviously, and he'll probably come after me for saying that. And, Rebel Media was, one of the most powerful sources of far right propaganda, pro-Trump media in the years leading up to Trump's election and directly afterwards, with Lauren Southern, Jack Posobiec, Faith Goldy, many others. I mean, he built a very successful far right media empire, basically, which is not doing as well anymore. And, as someone with that experience, it's an experience that I share. I'm sure he has relatives who survived the Holocaust. That was a unique historical moment. 2 out of every 3 Jews in Europe were murdered. 90% of Jews in Poland, where my grandmother's from, were murdered. And she's still alive. It's important that we remember those events and, call out ethnic cleansing and racism as it happens. But certainly a man, not refusing to wear a mask in Alberta does not qualify as a genocide. I mean, and Ezra Levant knows that. He just knows the power of that.
Well, of course he does. Of course he does. He knows how to set up fundraising websites, and he knows how to take senior citizens' pensions. That's what he does. This audience member goes on to say, you're talking about Pavlovsky raising his hand in the Nazi salute. He's gone on to threaten the LGBTQ community, Muslims, leftists, progressives, so-called Antifa. Says it sounds to me like a similar list from the 1940s. So where do you see this going? I mean, we talked to a guy by the name of Jason Kenney, not Alberta's premier, a guy, a pretty contemplative and reasonable and quite delightful guy out of Richmond, Virginia the other day, who joined us on the show to talk about what it's like to face online vitriol from people who think he is Alberta's premier. And it started off as a really fun and entertaining conversation, and then we got serious and we started talking. He described himself as a pre-Trump Republican. And it's been an interesting thought exercise to ruminate over. I mean, heck, Liz Cheney's a classic example. Like, where is this party going? And what does this party look like? And I know that there are a lot of, whether they're Reagan or Bush era Republicans, what have you, that have probably no appetite for the red MAGA hat. It would trigger them because it would represent, to my mind, the desecration of their party. It also led to them having 4 years in the White House. But what does the future look like, do you think, of the Republican Party? I mean, there's certainly an undeniable political angle to all of this. What are you keeping an eye on present day and moving forward?
I think it's without a doubt still the party of Trump, will remain the party of Trump. And even if Trump doesn't run in 2024, the ethos of the Trump administration is embedded into the modern Republican Party. The idea that you have to trigger the opposition that was pioneered by people like Cernovich and Southern in my film is embedded into the modern Republican ethos. And I think what we're looking at is a future of politics in the US, but I would imagine Canada too, and certainly already in Europe, where you have a center and left party like the Democratic Party that's committed to multiculturalism, that is pro-immigration, believes that, the United States was founded on, sin to some extent, but also promise, of course, that it was founded on ethnic cleansing of Native Americans and slavery, but also the promise that people are created equal. And I believe the Democratic Party, not that it's perfect, but will move more vocally in supporting multiculturalism and supporting immigration, and eventually, living up to these past sins. The Republican Party, is going to continue, in my view, to double down on nativism, on a kind of implicit white nationalism, kind of dog whistling to it the way Tucker Carlson does. And it's going to put people like Cheney or kind of never Trump Republicans like David Frum and a lot of these other guys who used to be part of the Republican Party in a very hard place, because the Republican Party is not a big tent party for people of color. And as the US becomes more diverse, that is now the fault line in American politics. It's where do you stand on changing demographics? Where do you stand on a more diverse nation? And the Republican Party is unwilling to accept that implicitly. And you see it in everything from, claiming the election was illegitimate because of big turnouts in black cities like Philadelphia and Detroit, which is totally racially coded, but also trying to disenfranchise voters. It's trying to stop immigration, trying to stop DC from becoming a state, which would give, more people of color and the Democrats more power. I'm really not a partisan. I'm not a lifelong Democrat or anything like that. I just, think the US is an immigrant society. My grandparents came here fleeing persecution, and a lot of people continue to do that. And I believe that's what this country should be. And I hope one day the Republican Party recognizes that. That's my hope. I think it might take 10 or 20 or 30 years for that to happen. I think I think we're in the middle of the story.
If you're just tuning in, streaming live on YouTube, if you're listening, streaming live via the Mixlr audio app, we're talking to Daniel Lombroso, the filmmaker, the director of White Noise, which is the Atlantic's first feature doc, by the way. It's being featured right now at Northwest Fest at northwestfest.ca. Daniel, how did this, when it's all said and done, or maybe you've actually just sort of described it as a movement in process or a continuing sort of a thing, the process it had on you, the impact it had on you directly. What a 4-year journey. Now the film's out. Now you're starting conversations like these. Now your work's getting in front of people. How did this impact you personally? Are you able to look back, sort of a retrospective look?
Definitely. I mean, in the moment, it was hard to kind of make sense of what was happening. I am what you call a one-man band filmmaker. So I was often, shooting the camera, running sound, interviewing. Sometimes I had an assistant, but oftentimes I didn't. So what that meant is that I was alone with either just my subject or sometimes dozens of people in the far right, sitting with them, drinking with them, eating with them, getting to know them, the kind of intimate stuff that you do with family or friends, but you don't typically do with racists. And that was my entire life for really 3 years of production, but the project was 4 years from beginning to end, across 12 states and 5 countries. It's the kind of crazy shit that is like just deep in my mind now. And I think, one day when I have some more distance, I'll probably write a memoir and kind of explain to people how crazy it was. But, in short, it was a lot of, kind of just upsetting, like anti-Semitic abuse, a lot of hate mail, a lot of manipulation, but also some sadness that these people, I thought maybe would have the chance to change. Lauren is around my age. She's obviously very smart, even if she's misguided. And we got very close. I was never her friend. I was there to understand her. But she leaned, she would tell me things and kind of I became a confidant for her, even if I kept the line. And, I thought she was so young that maybe she'd own up and say sorry. And for me, that's almost my, my biggest, not regret, but my biggest sadness when it's looking back at this project is that these people are unwilling to take any responsibility. They're unwilling to be reflective at all. And, everything I went through, I think was for the greater good and, is upholding my grandparents' legacies, who fled the Holocaust, who lost a lot of their relatives. And, they really taught me to shine a light and to document evil when it rises. And, that was my goal and that really got me through it. But, one day I'll unpack all of these crazy stories and maybe be back on your show in 20 years to talk about that.
Well, the door is, Daniel, I would love to talk to you anytime because we're only scratching the surface here. Let me tell you, this is an image we're going to put an image up on screen that may be disturbing to some people, but it's important that we talk about this and confront this. I'm going to credit the Edmonton Journal here. This is reporting by Johnny Wakefield, a journalist there. This is a photo that was captured on a property near Breton, Alberta, a rural property. This is just one example of swastikas that have been seeing Hitler Youth memorabilia that's been seeing flying in Alberta. And obviously groups like the Friends of Simon Wiesenthal Center for Holocaust Studies have been called, B'nai B'rith have been called to comment on these types of images. I mean, what the hell are they going to say? But the average citizen, the average person, I don't even know what I would do. I don't even know what I would do if I was driving past a property and saw Nazi flags flying. I don't even know if I want to go on the record now with what's going through my mind. But obviously you'd be dealing with somebody that's completely unhinged. In the context of your role as director of this film, the grandson of Holocaust survivors, an engaged citizen and a storyteller, what do you say to people, the average citizen that's going to hear this podcast, that's going to watch this interview, and that's going to be troubled by what they see in your film, troubled by what they see all around them? What's the call to action, so to speak?
I think it's two things. One is to talk to your neighbors and to be aware how widespread racism, conspiracy, anti-Semitism remain. And I would say even remain and are growing. Social media incentivizes really kind of dangerous behavioral patterns the things that go viral online are the things that are provocative, that are potentially racist or potentially anti-Semitic. It's way easier for something to go viral when you say Hillary Clinton has Parkinson's, like Mark Cernovich did, than it is to say Hillary Clinton is a great fit for president and I like her because she's accomplished. We live in a news environment where provocation helps you. It helps you build a brand. You see that happen with Lauren and Mike, who use it to build their own brands. And I would just encourage people as they're going through their social media to really think hard about what they're reading, to think hard about what they're spreading, and to talk to, friends and family and neighbors and see what they believe. The point isn't to shame anyone. I don't think shaming works. I don't believe in that. I have a lot of conservative family members, but, to just be aware of the kind of, racism that is still hard coded into all of our societies, including New York City, where I live, which is one of the most diverse places in the world. The other thing I'll say is that, these individuals present a very powerful image to their followers. Gavin McInnes, like you said, but also Lauren and Mike and Richard. And if you watch the film, I think you'll realize really how empty these ideas are, that it's so easy to be seduced by hatred. It makes you feel good for a little moment, the way any drug makes you feel good for a moment. But, as this drug wears off, you still have all your problems. You have to worry about how you're going to make money and if you're going to get married and what the purpose of life is. Like, these are not, buying into white nationalism does not solve all your problems. It might make you feel good for a few months or maybe a few years. But if you meet all these people years later, they're still depressed and alone and still have the same existential questions. So I would just encourage people, if they're, getting down that rabbit hole and they're starting to be radicalized, to realize that it's not the solution and they're just going to end up right where they started, but with a really horrible reputation following them.
The internet has a long memory. Daniel, I guess I will say congratulations on the film. It is a remarkable story. I mean, I've never quite seen anything like it. I didn't quite understand what it was until I started watching it. And then I'm going, this isn't file footage. This guy's in the car. This guy's behind. I mean, it's just unbelievable. I was riveted for the 92 minutes or whatever it is. People can check it out right now. White Noise at northwestfest.ca, screening on demand, online, all the way through till May 16th. And give Daniel a follow on Twitter at Daniel Lombroso. He did this as the Atlantic's first feature doc. He's now on staff at The New Yorker. It's really great to have you here on the show. Thanks for this.
Thanks so much. I had a great time.
You bet. Kim says, listening to this while watching the girls play hopscotch outside right now is really something. Kim's describing all of us that have our normal, regular, everyday lives, and then you're aware of these underbellies that exist, right?
I caution against the idea of thinking of it as an underbelly, though. And when we talk about it as someone being unhinged, or I don't like to use the word crazy, but sometimes that word gets thrown around, and it diminishes kind of the power and really truly like the movement, like how it's not just one isolated incident, that people are feeling like they are not getting their fair share. And so they try to figure out a way, or they're seduced. I loved that. Seduced by hatred. Yeah. And how it can go viral, and it has this ability to, get shares and create an audience.
There's this this quote. The film starts with a quote on screen by James Baldwin. It says, "I imagine one of the reasons people cling to their hates so stubbornly is because they sense once hate is gone, they will be forced to deal with pain." And I thought that was just, that was my first heads up that this film was no joke.
You were like, here we go.
I hit pause and I just read it a few times and I was like, here we go. And it's pretty rare for me. Like I'm the guy that, like, when I'm watching docs or films or TV, I'm sitting on the floor and I'm folding laundry and I'm making lists and I'm catching up on emails. And that wasn't the case with this one. I was locked. I was just like locked in.
I had to pause it a couple times just because I needed a moment.
Yeah.
Because I was overcome by, and I don't know, I don't want to be like, guess what you're missing out on, folks. Like, I don't want to talk about something that people don't have the experience of watching it, but I had to take a pause because it was so much to take on.
It is a lot to
take on. So much to take on.
Yeah, I encourage people to check it out again, northwestfest.ca. our team, our friends at Kubi Energy each and every Monday. This is the counterbalance to a lot of the stuff we just talked about, important conversations, and we'll dig into them. We promise courageous conversations each and every week, but also reasons to take a step, to breathe, right? Including positive reflections on our first broadcast of each and every week. You share with us the stories of your kids, hilarious things they say, or the person that paid it forward, a random act of kindness, or maybe the first daffodils in the garden of the year, whatever. We focus on your positive reflections. You can submit them to talk@ryanjesperson.com. The team at Kubi Energy is hard at work right now. They've got industrial projects going. Jake Kubisky, the CEO, is telling me a ton of residential work going on right now in BC and Alberta. They can cover Western Canada out of their 2 offices in Kamloops and Edmonton. And they've got journeymen, either electricians or electrical apprentices. You know the job's getting done right. Plus, they handle all your paperwork. You're wondering, do I get is there a subsidy, or does the government help me out with this? They're the experts, so you don't have to do the digging. Just check them out at kubienergy.ca. Also, I mean, when it comes to conferences and getting together, I don't have to tell you that things are different these days, right? Traveling, especially for more remote or rural communities, it's not always feasible, right? Plus, you add in the cost of basic registration, flights, accommodations, and for a lot of people, conferences just aren't possible, not always feasible for a 3-day event. That's what's so great about this year's virtual Canadian Rural and Remote Housing and Homelessness Symposium, being hosted by the Rural Development Network and the Rural Ontario Institute. They're delivering conversations that matter to you directly to where you are. So wherever you are, you can join the conversation from June 1st to 3rd in whichever way works for you. Plus, with only 3 weeks left before the conference, make sure you use the code RYAN to save 20% off your tickets at crrhh.ca. That's crrhh.ca, the promo code RYAN, to get 20% off. crrhh.ca to me is one of the more fun things I get to say as we recogniz our partners.
I like it.
It reminds me of the Dogfather back in the day. SNOOPDOJZ. It was like, we taught my mom how to recite that. She does a great job still to this day, quoting Snoop Dogg. Sam, you ever put that in front of Sue?
I don't think I've ever put Snoop Dogg lyrics in front of my mom.
You've never had Sue going on Snoop Dogg?
Yeah, we'll try that at the next family gathering.
You know what I wonder if maybe we could
Mom,
do, Sam?
check this out.
Maybe we could set up sort of like a mom rap battle or something like that. This could be all part of our first Real Talk road trip.
Oh my
I mean, the
goodness.
possibilities are endless. Possibilities are absolutely endless. I wanted to note something interesting that's flying under the radar right now, and we are going to be offering coverage of mayoral races in big, some big Canadian cities, including Edmonton and Calgary. It's going to be a little bit different as we treat this as a national show, but obviously a show where a lot of our audience is right here in Alberta. So we will be speaking to candidates for mayor, probably as part of themed shows between now and the elections in October. I wanted to note something interesting that's happening today. Former Edmonton City Councillor and a well-known entrepreneur, Michael Oshry, is going to be officially, he's filed his papers quite a while ago, but he's officially announcing today that he's going to be seeking the mayor's chair in the city of Edmonton. And he's got some VIPs that are joining him at the announcement, and one of them really jumps out at me. Have you seen the list of the 3 that are joining him? So he's got the CEO of PCL Construction, he's got a physician, and he's got former Edmonton Oilers captain and Stanley Cup champion Andrew Ference. That's going to be, I'm assuming, I mean, if you show up that you're essentially endorsing him. We'll wait to see what happens and what Ference says. But here's what I'm thinking. I'm thinking that Michael Oshry is infusing his platform into the environmental or green or sustainable conversation. That's what I read it. I don't think he's reaching out necessarily just to sports fans or Oilers fans or hockey fans with this. I think it's a bit of a nod to what I'm expecting is going to be an environmental angle on his campaign. So I think that's going to be interesting because, I think that should be part of a conversation as part of a mayoral race. But from what we've seen so far, we haven't seen really robust platforms released yet in either of the cities. Not really. But this could be an interesting one, and it gives us, motivated and what's the word I'm looking for? Engaged voters an opportunity to start looking for specifics in what platforms are offering.
Yeah, maybe this is not something that I should be admitting, but here we go. That I'm not really paying attention yet
Yeah.
Like I'm kind of like I'm gonna hit pause. I'm gonna wait until say August.
Well, there's not a lot to pay attention to right now.
That's true as well. How about you, Sam?
How about me? I am okay. So on the record here, because as a journalistic institution, we should have full disclosures. My partner is working on another mayoral campaign, so like my head's been in campaigns for the last month or so.
Oh, fair enough.
So I get to hear about it all the time, but I agree. Like in Edmonton, in these municipal elections, like, as I recall, you get murmurs of who's running, like going into the summer. Everyone kind of takes the summer off, and then like, boom, end of August, September is when campaigning really, really, really heats up. So, aside from some personal connections that I have to it, I'm pretty checked out on it this early too. It feels so early to be worrying about this.
Yeah. Sandra wonders, is Mike Nichol coming on the show? Yeah, we'll see. I don't know. I don't know if I want to talk on the record about Mike Nichol yet. I'd love to interview Mike Nichol, but if he comes on the show, he's going to get his ass kicked. He should probably know that. I got a lot of things to say to Mike Nichol. And if you want the background on that, you can just read Edify's innovation issue this month. You can get the backstory on why I can't stand that weasel.
Are you talking about this
Oh, that
issue?
one there?
This
That-
issue?
Oh, yeah, that is the issue I was talking about. Yeah, the one fired from Talk Radio, Ryan Jesperson, now the Prince of Podcasting.
Oh,
yes, that
yeah,
is.
this one, okay.
Yeah, that is. I don't think that I can ask people to call me Your Highness yet. When do you get
So
to
I
be-
don't need to do that? I thought you said I had to do that.
Do you get to be Your Highness when you're a prince? No, I think His Royal Highness. Oh, yeah, because His Royal Highness Prince Philip, right, passed away. HRH Prince Philip, right? His Royal Highness.
So I need to. So I can stop doing that now?
Yeah, no. No more kissing the ring. Okay, well, it was fun while it lasted.
Yeah.
It was fun while it lasted.
I do want to, because like we did some heavy stuff today, and I really want to flag something that I think is just like a gem, and I'm really excited about it. That the University of Calgary has a free tuition contest going on, and you might be like, "What are you talking about, Sarah? How is that good news?"
Wasn't it Lethbridge?
What did I say?
Calgary.
You're right.
Okay.
Lethbridge.
Yeah.
Thank you. Whoa, where's my head at?
All good.
Calgary, apparently. So they are actually, anybody that is a student that is enrolled for the fall, they could receive, if they get a vaccine before September 8th, they are entered to win. There are 9 available scholarships for full tuition and fees for the fall of 2021.
That's so great.
Yeah, free tuition if you get vaccinated.
I love it. I mean, qualify for free tuition. If
Right,
you get
sorry,
vaccinated.
yes.
Yeah, that's fantastic. That's a great, haters are going to say, well, if they could afford to do that, if they could afford to offer free tuition, maybe they should face a few more cutbacks, these high on the hog post-secondary institutions. Yeah.
Can you just let me bask in the glory?
No,
of the-
I've worked in talk radio for 6 years. I'm jaded and cynical and calloused and all of the things. My faith in humanity is destroyed. It was until I came here and I found you. I found all of you. And every morning I show up with a hop, skip, and a jump in my step, and optimism abounds. On Real Talk. We're back at it tomorrow. Tomorrow's show is going to be a unique one for us. Sarah has put together a formidable lineup. It's one of our only themed shows. In other words, unless all hell breaks loose or there's a major news event, we're only talking about hunting, food, sustainability, ethics. Get your emails in now to talk@ryanjesperson.com. We can't wait for it. We'll talk to you tomorrow morning. Have a great day.
The good